at like the global South, we were kind of producing like all of the things that we're interacting with every day. And I do think like this, it's this generalization that happens. Like it's both condensing a very specific history, but then it also opens out, and it actually like this actually like the lesson is that this actually like subtends kind of like all aspects of our work, all aspects of our government, all aspects of like civil society and infrastructure are just like as equally implicated in it. So yeah, I think for Roland, it's like it's both. There's both like a specific history of the black worker, but then there's also just like the general fact of commodity production. And I think it's like bringing those two together that is kind of the political lesson of the work.
Yeah, I think with these works, it's interesting. You can imagine kind of looking through them to try to like access, or kind of like emotionally or subjectively access, or experience or relate to the idea of the specific incarcerated worker who you're imagining in their labor, and that's one possible read on these, but I think what you're arguing, which I think is a more compelling way to read them, is that they instantiate, that they make physical, that they materialize, like labor in the abstract, like the total, all of it, everywhere, all under different kinds of unfreedom, even though these are produced in this specific like use case of incarcerated labor. And I think the ready-made form is a really interesting one to interrogate that, because when the ready-made comes into the gallery, you are invited to like disaggregate it from any previous context of labor, even of use. And here we kind of, remembering the like history of the ready-made, arrive at like a different kind of abstraction, a different understanding of abstraction here of like labor in the abstract. I think it's important, makes it important that these are works of art in the ready-made tradition. We're almost out of time. We've got 5 minutes remaining.
Should we ask the audience, or is there time for that?
I guess we could ask the audience. To the audience, any thoughts or questions?
Just in the context of the book fair and Cameron Rowland's work, I remember the artist space show where he did like a bootleg of a prison system. Just I forget what the actual content was. It wasn't supplies of the prison system, but some sort of yellow pages of the, I forget, there was a certain organization that he was reproducing the bootleg, and then and that was circulated in sort of a discreet way. It was like something that you had, there was no indication of what it was. It was like a clear bootleg. And then I think the Mocha show had another sort of inscrutable publication that was just listings of like property sales of this at an island in South Carolina, I think, and that was another way that the work was sort of contained, but also the distribution. It was like hard to figure out what it was. Like his hand wasn't totally present in it, and I keep coming back to that in the context of where we are with the book fair, but how he chose to have this exhibition, particularly the Artist Space one, have another life in that like bootleg copy of the of this manual. And just thinking about the thesis that you were presenting, if that how that fits somehow, like that kind of choice of distribution, and cloaking somehow like an artist's book with a manual or something like that.
No, that's interesting. I mean, that's a work that's not included as part of the documentation that's made available by the gallery. So it's not, because I did not live in New York in 2016. I wasn't here for the show, so yeah, I don't have any particular thoughts about that particular work, but I think that is like it is in terms of the cloaking or something. It is like nice that there are parts of the show that that simply don't circulate.
No? Okay. So yeah, I think you were getting at this sort of at the end, but I was curious. I was thinking about the Etna piece, the disgorgement piece, and one thing I take about like Adorno's basic argument about political art is that often political art, by trying to concretize something abstract, ends up like underplaying how deep the forces are that keep things in place, and also how horrible things are. So the example of like Brecht in a play makes out fascism to be the work of a little gangsters, and it's sort of like it trivializes and underrates how like monstrous the system is, and it's just like a bad analysis of where fascism came from. So I was thinking about the disgorgement piece in that regard, because there's a way in which, when you said like, I didn't know the piece before, when you said the word Etna, I'm suddenly, I was thinking about, well, is what's most horrible about Etna that it may have had origins in insuring slaves and its origins of slavery, or is what's horrible about Etna and what we need to understand about Etna, it's like everyday aspect of, whatever, denying lots of people the healthcare they need, being part of a monstrous system of, deprivation. So I wonder, I think you were maybe getting at this at the end, that you do think Roland kind of enters into that space, not just thinking about sort of the most egregious aspects of capitalism and racial domination, but the kind of the bureaucratic everyday way in which it produces monstrosities. But I'm just curious if you think he escapes Adorno's criticism in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think for the show, I do think the meaning of that particular work is determined by like the distributive unity of all the totality of all the pieces that are in the show together, which are each one has like a historical hook or something. But I don't think the show wouldn't be reduced to 10 complaints about bad things that happened in with these particular corporations or what have you. I do think I do think what one of the resources that Roland gets from like really specifically engaging this like Seth Siegelaub era of art making is I think it's like that it's not just the argument about like this particular insurance company, because of course like you could pick any other insurance company and you would find all sorts of monstrosity. But yeah, I know, I do think it is like the aesthetics of the administered world and how, but like, and kind of like, yeah, both registering, it's like both, it's both a denunciation, but I think for Roland, the whole thing is also to heighten the tension and to like deepen the implication, right? So it's like the artist space has bought shares in it. Our artist space comes registered with Core Civic or whatever, and is able to like purchase all these prison-made commodities or whatever. And kind of, I think at every turn, Roland, instead of like saying like the institution is like impure, and I'm going to point that out as kind of like maybe second-gen institutional critique would have done. It's kind of at every moment, it's like the institute, like I'm going to just like deepen all the levels of imbrication and complicity, and like that kind of is itself the work. I think it's not like maybe a simple denunciation, because I don't think Roland thinks that there's not like a morally purifying gesture that kind of like happens at the end once they've exposed. I think it's quite different from like Hans Hacke at the Guggenheim or something like that. I don't think it's just to expose like a bad thing.
I kind of wonder if like the contract form is like absolute specificity and it's like really, really singular context might evade that Adorno's critique there by virtue of only highlighting like one specific instance and like indexing that instance only. I think that holds open the possibility that there are like these other like ongoing ways like Etna really, really sucks. So I kind of wonder if the contract form can in particular like evade that in its really not making up.
Thank you all. And thank you, Rachel. And Eren. Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, that'd be fun. Thank you.
other side of the coin to your project. So instead of my research like looks at how do like objects promulgate like the ideology of race that like locates people, pinpoints people in race, rather than like work that like allows people to find a sense of like belonging or becoming like self-identifying in their own racial identity. I mean, my path towards like my academic work is just like in museums. Like I saw objects that were like inexplicable to me. I work on like kind of like some unsavory like racializing objects, and I was like, how do these work and like what are these? So that's kind of like how I did it and ended up there. So what period do you work on?
Hello. Hello.
Cool, like American or?
Nice to meet you. Sorry, I got it.
That's a really good one, yeah.
I think we sent like 3 files to have on the presentation. But other than that, we really don't have like a presentation. We're just gonna be talking. We are the 3, yeah. Hey, Jack. I think we had this one year you send them by a 3. Oh, okay. Yeah. And they have 3, yeah. You know what I'm talking about? Okay, awesome. I'll take the middle one.
Is this on?
Probably not. They'll probably give us a mic check, I hope.
I don't want to scare people. This is if you ask me a hard question. I'm like, Ben, I don't know.
So at the beginning, I guess we'll just introduce ourselves. I can kind of introduce all 3 of us and the name of the talk. And then I'll... Hi. Not really. We sent 3 files through a Dropbox folder. But it's not like we actually need them to do the talk. So if no one knows where they are, that's okay. There was like a date we were supposed to send like images for the talk by if we wanted them on there. So I feel like I can look and find it in my email if you want. But again, it's also like we don't have anything that we like need to have behind us while we do the talk.
I guess I'm just wondering, do you have like a slideshow or like a PDF or something, or just like you just sent out?
We literally just sent 3 images. Yeah.
You want to do the intro, or are we doing the intro? You should do the intro.
Okay, I'll do the intro.
And then my name is Zari, not Ramona.
Ari?
Zari.
Zari. Okay,
Yeah.
that's good to know. That's good to know. I never knew that.
No, my name is Ramona, but thank you so much. Yeah. It's my like pen name when I like
I'll try not to slip
publish.
up by accident.
Don't worry about it if you did. That's not a big deal.
Unfortunately, I can't get them.
Don't worry about it. It's really all good.
It's okay. Thanks for trying. Yeah. Sorry, but yeah. Sorry.
I have a pen name too, but I'll just use my real one. It's
Oh,
too
you
much.
haven't?
Yeah, I only publish under my pen name, but when I do talks like this, it's too hard to go by my other name.
Yeah. You can just say Falgoush.
It's Samuel Tefreshi,
Samuel Tafreshi.
village my family's from, and my younger brother's name.
Where's Tafresh?
It's like in the mountains here in Tehran. It's in the outdoors.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
That's so cute. What about you? What's your background, Orhan?
So in background in what sense, like where I'm from. I'm Lebanese Palestinian. I grew up all my life in Lebanon, but my dad's Palestinian.
Palestinian. Nice. Where in Palestine? From Haifa. Haifa. Nice. Cool.
Should we just begin whatever they want to tell us?
I don't think this is on.
Still have people. Oh yeah, we store still.
Wow, it's so bright. Holy, like I can't even. I feel like I need sunglasses. Okay. Just a question: is this being recorded? Like the audio or video or both? Okay. All right. Okay.
All right. Hi everybody. Can the mic on?
No, I don't think
Okay, not quite yet.
I guess we don't need mics.
Hopefully.
they're not.
We need the mic. All right. Oh, there we go. Well, Thank you all for coming to our talk. I'm so excited to be here with everybody. This is under, over, and around censorship and alternative publishing with Khabar Keslan and Falgoush. I'm Ben Rajali, the editor-in-chief of Khabar Keslan. This is Zari from Falgoush. And this is Norhan, who is a translator with Khabar Keslan. So just to introduce ourselves a bit, Khabar Keslan is an independent publication based in Beirut, Lebanon. We publish bilingually. We do a lot of different one-off projects, from an annual magazine to sort of other individual print projects that are more like newspaper, poster, zines, comics. And I'll let you talk a little bit about Falgoush.
Yeah, hi. We're an art collective and an independent publisher promoting Iranian, really, voices. And our programming ranges from film screening, event planning, various publications, and so forth.
And then Norhan, why don't you talk a little bit about yourself too?
Briefly, I'm a poet from Beirut. I've lived my whole life in Lebanon, just moved to DC last year. And yeah, I had a great pleasure working on Omar Berrada's writings that we'll tell you a bit about also.
So when we first had the idea to do this talk, under, over, and around, to be honest, a lot of it had more to do with the censorship that, as publications from, quite honestly, the Middle East, you know, we've all in different ways had to come up against censorship in a variety of ways and respond to it. And a lot of our work, both at Khabar Keslan and Falgoush, looks to publications of the past. It looks to people who have been doing a variety of publishing strategies to get around these constraints. And so that's kind of where it came from, which is a little different than, honestly, I think how we feel sitting here right now, where obviously we're at an incredibly heightened moment of censorship in the United States, which often censorship is treated as this thing that only happens outside of the Western world. And so I think it's really compelling to be in a place where, yeah, we're seeing valedictorians from California universities who are not able to give speeches because of the fact that they are pro-Palestine. We are seeing professors and students who are being, in many different ways, censored. And that censorship takes so many forms that go beyond what we think of that has to do with trying to keep you from saying what you want to say. Censorship is something that I think more often, if anything, is violent first and foremost, involves mass arrest, involves death, it involves, you know, the murder of war. Like when we look at Palestine, when we look at Gaza right now, I think that you should not only see slaughter, you should see censorship in a way, because this is an entire generation that's being censored. And it's not that all the tactics that you can learn can really make you ever, let's say, impervious to censorship. But I think we were hoping that if we talk about a few different examples, both from the present that are happening right now in the US and Germany and France, as well as some of the different publications that we've looked at that have taken a lot of, and like artists and individuals who've taken a lot of different lenses to how to respond in their work to censorship, that, I don't know, hopefully we could share a little bit of strategy, insight, and just kind of open up this conversation. We're hoping to leave a little time at the end in case anybody else here who has also had experiences with censorship could talk about things they have learned from it. I can say that as the editor-in-chief of Khabar Keslan, we have, you know, dealt with censorship ourselves. We have had about $1,500 of our work seized, you know, the work that everyone here does at this fair, which I think for a lot of us often feels innocent enough. You know, it feels as if you're doing zines, you're doing publications, you couldn't imagine why anyone would care about it enough to even sell it, let alone care about it enough to arrest you and take all of it. And when that happened to us, we're a small publication like most, and so we really did have to spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to even make up the ground we lost. And yeah, so I think we're gonna talk about a lot of different things, but I just wanted to kind of open up and say these are the things that we have been thinking about, the three of us, as we went into this talk. And do you guys have anything you want to add?
Yeah, we were thinking about how censorship is always thought of in the US as something happening overseas or over there, and here we have freedom of expression, our First Amendment. But coming here actually made me realize how many things you're not allowed to say, let alone put in a publication. I was even worried to have my name on our Salute to the Olives because of the kind of content that's in it, although it's basically a call for freedom. It's a call by this poet who has written behind bars for 26 years, just reflecting on his life, reflecting on his experiences that got him to the point where he realized that he's face to face with this colonial entity that has its also local players that made him revolt against this. And as something as human as that can be seen as transgressing, or if you mention that he's a freedom fighter. So we were also talking about how language is being abused and manipulated in many ways that makes a certain topic, such as freedom, look as if it's pure terror, or how terrorism is in the current diction. So terrorism is supposed to be an act of terror just to cause terror without an objective. But we see with freedom fighters, it does have a very clear objective, which is liberation. We want our land back, we want our houses back, our memories back, and we want to have our future. We want to be preserved. So talking about these things in the context of the US is very tricky, especially on campuses, as we see now, people being arrested, being suspended, being thrown off their housing that's provided by the university. So the level of censorship actually that I've experienced here goes way beyond what I ever experienced in Lebanon. Yeah, that's my, yeah.
I'll just add briefly to what Ben and Nurhan shared. We also had some plans to talk about evading censorship and creativity that censorship sometimes, leads to, and all the funny and creative way that you can sometimes go around it. And it's been a really sad and depressing week for Iranians that makes it really hard to think about that, because the dissident rapper Tumaja Salehi was handed his death sentence this week, and he was a messenger of hope and somebody who represented courage and bravery, and it's really hard to talk about hope this week with everything that's going on. So I do want to maybe dedicate this talk to Tumaj and all the political prisoners, all the artists in Iran who had to face very strict punishment for their art, and those who had to also leave Iran. Is not always easier on the other side. We've had artists who move and live in exile, and they kind of quietly just die, and they're incapable of creating. So exile is not always equal to freedom. And yeah, we'll talk about some strategies, but the truth of the matter is it's a very painful subject. It's very traumatic, and but there's no point to be hopeless. We can't afford to be hopeless, so we're gonna keep talking and give you examples of people we can be inspired by.
Thank you for saying all that. I feel like that was a really good way of leaning into, yeah, I think the point you made about, especially, as insane as it sounds, not insane, but the moment that comes after being released is honestly the most complicated. Like, I can speak to personal experience that I was in Lebanon and arrested for the work that we do here. I spent a fair amount of time being interrogated. Alhamdulillah, I was released, but I had to leave Lebanon. I'm not even Lebanese, but I had been living there 4 years. My work was there, my life was there, and it was upended in a moment. And I spent most of the year and a half since then trying to scramble enough work, enough life back together to do this. At this fair, it's the first time we're releasing any new work since before I was arrested. It is a year and a half, and that is with a lot of help and a lot of, honestly, dedication by a lot of our team who are still working in Lebanon and unfortunately can't even enjoy this fair because we still don't distribute in Lebanon. And so I do think there really is something to be said for, like, obviously the times you spend in jail, the times you have to deal with these events are incredibly traumatic for most people. And then also on top of that, the quiet part of trying to build a life is so much more complicated when you have to do it in a brand new place you didn't plan to be than you ever think possibly it could. And that small things like this, the reason these crackdowns are, when they're effective, is because they target often smaller individuals. And that is something that when you're a relatively unknown publication, it is not easy to respond to that, But I think we chose the title Under, Over, and Around because I think of censorship as similar to borders. You can build as many fences as you want. None of them will actually stop people. We have not built a fence that can stop people. There is not a form of censorship that cannot be navigated. There is always the choice as to which risks you want to take, which ways you want to be safe. Because I think when I've talked a lot of times about this, for example, I, as many people do, use a pseudonym for almost every bit of writing I do. And I started doing that long before I even really knew why I would be doing that. And it was because I just wanted to always know I'd be fine. And I felt ridiculous for so long doing it. Ridiculous because of the fact that in doing it, I lose opportunities to promote my own work. And it might never come up that I even, maybe no one even cares about my writing ever. And on top of that, if they really wanted to figure out what I wrote, of course, the right attention to detail could figure it out. But this is the complicated world of censorship, where every precaution you take, even if it seems useless, might actually be useful. And if you're someone, while we can all curate what we say and try to say the right thing and try to work within censorship, the repressive regimes, which is all of them, that exercise it, it doesn't matter if you stayed within the right lines. If they decide to focus on you, they will focus on you. It doesn't matter if you felt like you always said the right thing. There is no way to be perfectly on the right side of this. It is unpredictable. And that's why this is a funny balance of trying to take the right precautions, while at the same time, kind of take the right risks. And never think that you're just doing everything right, because you can't be, like functionally, but you can do so many things to respond to it. So I think moving into that, pseudonyms is a basic one that I would talk about as a strategy. It might seem even a little silly when you have to promote work or send it to your friends, it doesn't have your name on it, or you can't post it on your social media, but it's not. And I think if you really are worried about it, there are times to tactically choose when you want your name on this, and those are the risks you're taking, and there are times to tactically choose to know what I want us to work out there, and I want to know that we are good to put it out there. And oh my God, there's so many things that so many publications have done when they have gone through experiences far worse than our experience was. I mean, I think to get into some random sort of historical references of publications I like, because I feel like in this past year and a half, I really have looked a lot towards past publications to think about like, what can we be doing? And one I really liked in Iran was Chalangar. Chalangar is like a 1950s, it was sort of loosely associated with a few different communist groups in the 1950s, and they were a satirical magazine that did poetry and comics. And after Mossadegh was overthrown in the US-UK coup, their offices were raided, all of their work was banned, and they kept publishing for like 3 months. And the way that they did that was every issue came out with a different name on it. It was no longer Chalangar. Every issue, next issue was Jajrud. And then after that, it would be a new name. And then after that, it would be a new name. And then they did this again and again and again. And their only nod, which I appreciated so much, was that in the margins, they would usually write an insult leveled at their own publication. They would say like, fuck Chalangar, pretty much. And that was their nod to their audience. Hey, it's still us. You know, and then that way, if anyone pointed to it and said, this is you guys, like, what are you talking about? This magazine says, fuck Chalangar. They hate Chalangar. How could it be us? And that's just like one of these interesting ways that like all of these different groups have come across and tried to figure out how can we keep doing this. And I've definitely thought that's like one example I can think of off the top of my head. Do you guys have any other thoughts about things you've seen other people do?
I wanted to bring up the unpredictability point that you mentioned, which and I would want you to talk more about it, where you don't actually know what they might be looking for. And as you said, you might be using a pseudonym that you think would protect you, but it's not actually the name that they're looking for. Maybe they're looking at who's running the publication, where you're getting the money from, who are you associated with, who is it being distributed with. So we talked about operations and how they focus more on how things operate rather than focusing on specific people. So maybe you can talk a bit about that too.
Yeah. Please, if you have anything to add.
I will just say a funny story that I've shared with you all. So we did Dolat Tabari is a very well-known author, novelist in Iran, and by the way, he started as an actor. And if you've seen Mehjou's The Cow, he's one of the townspeople, and he's so young and gorgeous, and he's one of those authors that he looks like he's been 93 all his life. So if you've ever seen that film, he's actually in it. And his funny story is that in 1973, Savak arrests him, and as they're taking him, you know, he turns to one of the agents and asks, "Why are you taking me?" And the response he received was, "Well, everybody's house that we raided, they have one of your books on their shelves, so we thought we'll just stop by and take you with us too." And it's so true. I think sometimes it's just the association. And speaking about books strictly, and I like to expand on the unpredictability as well, but a lot of books that get banned in Iran or censored or people protest about them, most of the people have never read them, and they kind of become famous as books that were censored or banned. And maybe one of the good examples that y'all may relate to it is the Salman Rushdie's Satanic Verses, and it led to worldwide protests, and a lot of those people never read the book. I tried reading it. It's really hard. I tried twice. So yeah, it's just something about, you know, what it is about the artist or the work that provokes you. And unfortunately, yeah, and artists talk about a lot how, you know, the real tragedy of it is that people just know them by the violence surrounding the incident versus actually spending time to get to know their work. But I want to turn it back to Nurhan or Ben.
Yeah, I was just thinking also of Palestine and Gaza and how we see poets and publishers and scholars being physically harmed or even killed, like Rifat Al-Arir, for example. So you're censoring literally poetry, you're censoring a voice, you're censoring a whole generation of teachers who shaped their students and shaped the lovers of their writing. And to see this kind of violence, really, like, it's a different kind of violence, also not just like the killing of bodies, but also the taking of like minds and what they can do. And it's because they're scared. It just shows you how scared they are of words and what they can do. And it shows you how important it is to keep doing this work and to keep trying to speak to these people just as an ode to how much they've sacrificed. Rifat Al-Arir says, I have nothing in my house except for this marker. And if they try to come into my house, the most threatening thing I can do is use this marker, and I will use it against them. So you see the power of words and the power of poetry especially, and for something so disgustingly powerful to come and to kill this one man who is a poet, who, whether he participated in any other violent activities is beyond the point, but just for them to kill him, this shows the amount of fear that they have of the power of words, and this is good to keep in mind.
Absolutely. I think there is definitely a feeling when it comes to, I mean, all sides of this, a feeling like what we write or what we say actually somehow, it's funny, like censorship has this double-edged sword that I think we see really prominently in America, right? Where there is censorship here, and yet also with a sort of veil of the total freedom of speech, it feels like words are pointless. Like they fall flat when you can say anything. And I think that both of those are myths, you know? Like there is censorship in the United States that we all deal with, and that also the things we say are important. Whether it be, I mean, I'm sure everyone who's at the fair has probably seen what's going on surrounding PAC-B and trying to get printed matter to sign the Palestinian academic cultural boycott of Israel. This is exactly something that is about a statement where words do matter. And I've talked to everybody from printed matter staff to a former director to try to understand the issue better as someone who's absolutely an outsider to the institution. And again, very grateful to be here with this platform, very grateful to be releasing the first new publications that we've had in the last year and a half here at this fair. And talking to a former director, it actually did really help me understand what kind of things you think about. And one of them was definitely, obviously, that, hey, we're in New York City. You know, this is the headquarters of AIPAC. It matters what we say here. When I talk to the people that we work with in Khabar Keslan, who are in Lebanon, some of whom have never left Lebanon, about, you know, doing this event, whether we should go through with it, whether we should do this event, a lot of them are like, of course you should. One, we shouldn't censor ourselves. And then the other thing that a lot of people said was, you have a chance to speak for us in New York City, where AIPAC is headquartered. That is how this city is seen. And in a way, that's why you see Yemenis who are holding banners that are in solidarity with Columbia students. Because it matters what happens here. It matters what statements are made. And having talked to his former director about it, they sort of saying, look, it's hard for printed matter to make a statement because they're not the type of institution that generally makes statements about anything. They lean into programming, they lean into talks, and I think that is wonderful to lean into programming and talks. And I understand the complications that could come with feeling like you have to make a statement for anything going on anywhere in the world. I think my response to that would be that this is not anything going on anywhere in the world, and this is not any moment in history. If there was a time to make one statement and one statement only, I think this would be the time. And I think that this is not the only time that you're going to see this. This is why it matters, is when you look at something like what's going on in Germany. We see boycott Germany, right? We are seeing artists and writers in Germany who aren't even talking about boycotting Israeli institutions. Because of Germany's support of Israel, they're saying we will no longer take funding from German-funded institutions. We're nowhere near that in the United States. And I get why, because these are not one-to-one examples. Germany is not the United States is not Germany. But yeah, we support Israel more than any other country in the world. And we can't even really begin to have the conversation here of boycotting arts institutions that take money from, let's say, the National Endowment for Arts, which is US institutional money. So I do think we need to be talking about PAC-B. We need to be talking about these because it's actually kind of still a small part of what could largely be done when we're talking about this as a global issue. And I think that this is a thing that comes a lot in the form of censorship. Like, I've definitely talked to people when they talk about PAC-B here who say that sometimes, and it's not just here, so many institutions all over New York, all over the United States, who feel like there is this positioning where you either do talks and programming that focus on Palestine, or you can sign something like PAC-B, and they're not positioned against each other. These things go hand in hand and can very much go hand in hand. I don't want to talk only about PAC-B because there's so many other things to talk about, but it felt like that is relevant to the discussion we're having here, and so I did really want to be able to say that. I do think it's worth returning to some of the unpredictability one more time in this way because, and honestly returning to what we are here at Printed Matter, right? Everyone here is doing stuff in print, which I think is an interesting thing to focus on because print, there's so much that can be said online, and there's no doubt that I've talked to so many people who have dealt with censorship that comes from statements that they've made online. Whether it be here, whether it's been in Egypt, whether it's been in so many countries of the world. But in our experience as a publication, it mattered a lot that we do stuff in print. We were not in trouble because we said the wrong thing. We were in trouble because what we were, in general, our work is, I would say, cultural, political, about visual culture. But fundamentally, it's because of how myself and other people on our team looked on paper and the fact that we have print. Print signifies organization. Print signifies money, infrastructure. Even if it's less infrastructure than I think they hoped, like in our case, trying to get security officials to understand a passion project that sometimes loses money, oh my God, is the most complicated part of interrogations because they're like, why would you be pouring money into this project? Someone has to be funding you. But that is the questions going on here. That is why print does have this different relationship. And I don't think that it's just because of the fact that it signals money and organization. I also think that it's because of the fact that when people hold something in their hand, when they see it in the street, it makes a different impact. Social media is an incredibly important place to organize, but there is no doubt that material has literal weight.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. Yeah, I really appreciate you bringing up PAC-B, and I'll also share, I agree with what you share, and I think it's important from the artist's perspective. It does feel like we're exploited, that we're a cover for for Printed Matter by stating that we won't sign this document, but we're doing our work by curating artists who are speaking on behalf of Palestine. So if this table has a sticker about Palestine, that's good enough, then we don't have to do our work. And this is the oldest story in the book, and the Iranian government do it all the time, where I'll give the example of films because those are usually the most common examples. But yeah, they make it impossible for artists to create work, and artists do manage to do it, and they receive international acclaim. And then once they're successful, then the institutions get behind them and say, well, we made this possible, basically exploiting their success. And although we're talking about a smaller scale here, it does feel like we're some sort of cover and we're being taken advantage of, and we should all be responsible to speak up, and you can't hide behind other people's work. Yeah.
Thank you for saying that. I think that as we kind of get back into, let's be thinking about strategy. Yeah. I think we've talked about a lot of things that are difficult here. I think when I think about strategy again, I was excited to do this talk because the negative part of pouring over all of these publications that we've made as Khabar Keslan, the security officials, the benefit is I felt like it gave me an idea of, okay, what do the security officials see when they look at the publications we made, which was totally different than what I thought they would see. Things that I thought were innocent and small were huge issues for them, and things that I thought were irrelevant, or things I thought were maybe things they would care a lot about, actually they didn't care about at all. Also, other things that artists we work with did were effective at hiding what I think were political messages, like in one case, we have a comic that's a fairly experimental comic by a Syrian artist in Lebanon. They've been born and raised in Lebanon their entire life, but have always never had papers, have always been struggling to renew residencies. And for those who don't know, Lebanon, since the Civil War, has become an incredibly xenophobic place for Syrians, where there are, even right now, as the war goes on, you have political parties who are coming out to say that we should be deporting all Syrians to the border, you should be kidnapping Syrians off the street, dropping them off at the Syrian border, and this is some of the issues going on. So this artist that we work with made a comic called Where Are You Going? Which is sort of about being like trapped in this very small country, about the size of Connecticut your entire life, until very bored, and at the same time hyper paranoid because of the state surveillance that surrounds you. Being asked for your ID could be a huge deal. You could go to jail if your Akame is still being renewed. And in the work they did, it's a very beautiful, like they have such a unique style that's almost like reminiscent of manga, while also at the same time this like incredibly richly portrays the streets of Beirut. I can tell that while we sell a lot of this comic in general, whenever anyone from Lebanon comes to our table, they buy this one because it reminds them of Beirut. And this is one where they seized on a page where actually there's like kind of like drawings of zombies that are under surveillance cameras, and then sort of a bunch of like words at the bottom that are meant to mimic like the news lines at the bottom of TV screens that say things in Arabic that are what is said about Syrians in Lebanon, which is similar to what we say as xenophobic statements in America. They're stealing our jobs, they're killing us, they're living better than us. And when I was being interrogated, they held this page up to me and said, "You say you don't do political work? This is political. These phrases are political." And I went, "That's a picture of zombies. That's zombies." Like, "These phrases are political. This isn't zombie." And I was like, "That's zombies." And then they flipped to the next page where there was kind of like a chess match going on. And this guy was like, "Okay, fuck it. I don't know what this one's about. We're putting that one aside. We're going to go to another publication. We're talking about this publication now." And then it never came back up, and that artist's name never got brought up. They might have wanted to focus on those lines, that page. They never wanted to find out who the artist was who even drew the comic. And I think that's an interesting thing to learn, because a lot of people, I think, do worry about the things that they literally say, and that like what they have put into their work, like how that's going to be perceived. And this is another time where it's like it both was absolutely being analyzed by officials, and yet at the same time, they did not need to find out who wrote it, because they had someone who's involved in the organization of the publication. They didn't need to go find the artist to punish them for what they drew or said, because they're interested in punishing editors who are involved in the organization and the structure of the overall publication. So it's sort of, as one of my lawyers put it, you're going to take all the shots for everybody. Like, they want to know because I would say, "Hey, I'm not the writer of these. I'm not the artist. I'm not the editor-in-chief of this publication," because I was not done. I don't own Khabar Keslan. And they were sort of like, my lawyer was like, "That's useful to you. It's useful that as an editor, you are not the writer. You are not the artist. You are not the photographer. You are not the owner. But they still have you, and they don't have all those other people, so you will catch all of the bullets for all of those other guys." And that's what I mean by sort of to evade censorship involves this sort of like contradictory framing of tactics, which is it is both useful and irrelevant that I didn't do all that stuff. It was useful because it means I don't have to answer for what's in every single one of these publications, because I can say the truth. I edited, I did not write that line. I did not draw this page. And yet at the same time, of course, I'm going to be asked about all of it because I'm the guy in front of them who is the one who had all of these publications. And the reason all of this came to be was because I was coming back from a book fair just like this one, and just happened to have my own publications in my suitcase as I entered the country, where I had been living for years with no problems at all, selling this work at book fairs in Beirut. And this is, again, the unpredictability, is that this was not something that, like, I had distributed this in Beirut. I work with people in Beirut on this work. Nothing had ever come about of it. I say less offensive things. I say almost no offensive things, I think, in any of the writing I've done. And in our publications, we don't attack politicians. We don't attack political parties. And on the news channels in Lebanon, they attack each other. They make fun of their politicians. They say outrageous things. But why was it weird cracked down upon? It's the same reason that we're not alone here. For those who are familiar with the Lebanese media landscape, Megaphone, who's a major, they're on Instagram. They do a lot of different work reporting on everything from Lebanon to Palestine to even things going on in the US. They've had people brought in. There may be an account on Instagram with 10,000 followers. It's maybe been around 5 years. They had people brought into general security. Public Source, which is an investigative journalism project also in Beirut, Lebanon. It's maybe about 3 years old. In the same month, they also had someone called in for questioning about an article they did looking in during an investigation about the explosion that they had published. And why are these the groups being picked on when there are actually like a lot more offensive and major things being said against the government? Being picked on because we're small publications. It's being picked on because the first wave of censorship is those who do not have institutional ties.
And
it is
you're
those
not
who
tied to politicians as well.
Exactly. Go on.
So in Lebanon, there's a very clear connection usually between the media institutions and the politicians, so their backs are protected. They can say whatever they want on TV because the same people who own the news channel are also politicians. But with independent publications, with even independent news outlets, they are completely disconnected from the elite and the political system. So to them, they are really bearing all the bullets on their own, with no one to back them up except civil society at the end of the day and their readers. So yeah, it's very tricky for them. It's very dangerous. And you mentioned, I wanted to mention also Al-Hudud, which is another website based in Jordan that does completely satirical political writing, and you can't find the name of a single person on their website. It trashes the entire Arab region and their politicians. And it's incredible. It's very well written. I would encourage you also to check it. It's censored in Jordan. It's censored in regions in Iraq. In Lebanon, we're still receiving it, but sometimes you go to the website and you can't access it, so they change the web page. Yeah.
I wish I could share some examples. Unfortunately, because of the U.S. sanctions right now, just print in general is suffering. Books are luxury items. Paper and publication tools and machines have to get imported inside Iran. They can't afford to do that. But Iranians are very, they have a big appetite for books. Literature is important, and despite all the different policies and censorship, offices, and they have many. So there's the Ministry of Culture and the Islamic Guidance. That is really the censorship machine of the regime, and they have different offices, like the Office of Books, for example, and you have to submit your manuscript, and they read it, and they hopefully just have some edits for you. Sometimes they just say that your book is unworthy to be published. That's kind of the keyword they use. And I would share, I guess, I heard that there's a glossary, and like Ben was saying, people who do read the manuscripts, they're just normal people, they're not some sort of scholars, so they look for red flags and words that they were taught that shouldn't be included. And so this glossary kind of suggests other words that might go, that the agent may not know what it means, so they'll kind of look over it. And a lot of those words are the older Persian equivalents of it. And so it's kind of interesting. I wonder, how language will change over time when people constantly have to look for other alternatives that censorship officers wouldn't know the meaning of. But yeah, so yeah, the Ministry of Culture is kind of in charge, but also they have other, and the Ministry of Culture is connected to the legislative bodies, but then there's the Supreme Council of Cultural Revolution, which is not connected to any type of normal judicial channels. It answers directly to the Supreme Leader office and makes the policy making, decision making super easy and quick on the spot. So even if a book got a license through the normal channels, there's still a chance that some other office will catch it and they won't let it to publish. I don't believe there's a lot of independent publishing happening. A lot of magazines get shut down. A lot of journalism also draws a lot of attention. So internet has been very important for Iranians. There's a really great book called We Are Iran by Nasrin Alavi which talks about blogging and blogospheres when it first became a thing in the early 2000s. And I believe the first person who got imprisoned over writing a blog was an Iranian. And it really took the government some time to really catch up with internet. And they're doing a great job right now to censor and to shut down the internet too, but it's still people finding a way around it. And they come up with different VPNs and things like that. And yeah, I think internet is probably the one place for Iranians to be able to express themselves using different pseudonyms. And
there's also citizen reporting. in a few countries,
Yes.
and I think in Iran
Yep.
also, where you go and report other citizens for stuff that they've written online. I know it exists in Iraq also and in Egypt. And Iraq, I think, I'm not sure if it's in Iraq or Egypt, it's called Tabligh app, which literally means reporting. And even in Lebanon, they made like an app where you can report other people, and specifically they're targeting Syrians. It's really ridiculous how these technologies that are supposed to be there for the people can just be co-opted by governments to make them the most disgusting thing they can create out of them. And even like the censorship around Palestine, and even writing the word Palestine in any post you make will guarantee that you're not gonna get any reach for that post. Or even using, trying to use hashtags and exclamation marks and hieroglyphs basically to hide what you're saying about it. And I think that we shouldn't be doing that. I think we should say the words as they are. We shouldn't be changing how we talk about something so important for it to evade censorship, because the more you do it, the more it will change what the names of these places mean. For example, Palestine, like we should be able to write Palestine and get it out there. And I was telling also Ben that Shaheed is the most censored word on Meta's platforms. So Shaheed just means someone who has been killed fighting for a noble cause or by a natural disaster. But the word Shaheed is taken down almost immediately, like the post will be taken down if you use that word in English on Meta's platforms.
And I think this is a really important point to make about the type of censorship that exists here and in Europe. Is this type of censorship I think we've been talking about, whether it be Iran, Lebanon, Egypt, Iraq, I think is a type that often responds to things, and let's say we associate with crackdowns, right? In America, censorship is what holds the keys to your success. And that's what I mean, is like, oh, you might put all this effort into posts, you might have this great following, but if every word that you want to use to talk about everything you talk about is censored, you're not going to have your following see that post. If you're a journalist who wants to report on things that matter from an angle of justice, if you would like to rise to the highest rungs in the United States, you will have to abide by their style guides, which means you will not be able to say the word Palestine. You will have to say Palestinian territories. You will not be able to frame things in an honest way. You will have to begin to curate the way you frame everything. And that's what I mean, is it's not a country where you're usually going to say something and then immediately crack down upon, thrown in jail for the thing you just said. This is a country where you are being incentivized to self-censor yourself within a style guide that means you get to be more successful.
Yeah.
And that is a complicated type of censorship that exists many places across the world that pretends it is free speech.
And you will be punished economically. So when you can't get jobs, when you will be fired from your job for saying something, that's a form of censorship and punishment. When you have to self-censor yourself to make sure you can stay living in your house and not end up, on the
And we're
streets.
seeing it with professors right now. Professors who are losing their positions for no longer engaging in a type of self-censorship that their institutions encourages. And again, the thing that we were saying earlier about how at the beginning of censorship, it is always going to be disconnected individuals who are the ones who will suffer the most. And they will suffer it quietly. Maybe with a post here, maybe with a news article there, maybe their intimate circle of people know how much they had to suffer because of one thing they said or did. And for the most part, those will be the people who all get got in the first waves. And that is, I think, what we see right now, is we see students and associate professors who make $38,000 a year being the people bearing this brunt right now. And that's why it does matter that institutions break free of this type of self-censorship, because it is institutions that, like in Lebanon, will be more protected than the individuals who are losing opportunities to say what they want to say. Let me just check on how much time we have left, because we did it. Yeah, let's see. All right, it's a good time, I think. If anybody from our audience really has, I think, anything from a question to, I think, prioritizing kind of anybody else who may or may not in our audience have their own experience navigating whatever type of censorship in this country or others, we would love to hear from you. We definitely would love this to be a space where anybody can share any useful piece of advice that they might have. Tanya, go for it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So yeah, my name is Tanya, and me and Ben actually used to be roommates in Beirut. So thank you so much for this amazing talk. I'm currently a student at CUNY School of Law, and we're experiencing major censorship on so many levels. As of yesterday, the day before yesterday, we started our own encampment, pushing back against administrative decisions. demanding that our administration disclose their ties to the arms and death manufacturing industries and also divest from them. But primarily when I think of censorship, so essentially during our last graduation ceremony for the last wave of 3L students graduating, a student called Nirdine spoke on her platform against Zionism and for Palestinian liberation. And after her speech, we were informed that from there onwards, no graduation ceremonies for CUNY law students who were all there for in the name of public interest, speaking up for social justice, would ever be allowed to have a student speaker any longer. And so that was revoked from us. And so a number of students now at our school are suing the school, actually utilizing the skills that we are taught at the school to sue it. And so many CUNY campuses now are being sued by their students on these grounds. And we also, for the graduation ceremony of this year, we're meant to be holding it at Hunter's College, which is another CUNY campus. Hunter's College at the last moment revoked the contract that was for us to have the ceremony there. I'm a 1L student, I don't graduate this year. But essentially all of the 3L students had nowhere to graduate from anymore, and this was a direct consequence of Nirdine and Fatima, who had spoken up against Zionism, using their platform really to speak. I mean, CUNY Law's slogan is social justice, and we're meant to be fighting in the interest of like human dignity, essentially, and it's in the slogan itself. And the contradictions that are coming out now, how like language has lost all meaning, essentially, and sort of this like liberal veneer that is presented to us. Like, I left Lebanon to attend CUNY Law, premised on CUNY Law's words that essentially, that they would be graduating students like us. And I am so grateful for my classmates, who most of which are in solidarity, are at the encampment, or going to protest. Faculty who have stood by us. We're also being doxxed and enduring the consequences for their courage. But meanwhile, the administration, like most, I want to say, higher level institutions in the US, are deeply, deeply embedded in the war machine. And words like Palestine, like even uttering the word P is like forbidden. This is not something that's allowed. And so we're at a moment in time now where I think all of us are experiencing this in different ways, or at least paying close attention to what's happening. America right now is in a very scary place. Personally know a poet, a friend of a friend whose house she was visited by the FBI for a tweet that she had put out in support of Palestinian resistance. So it goes beyond now at this point losing her job. It's actually reached a level where some could successfully argue is like veering on fascism. So in that sense, I'm happy to be here in the belly of the beast in a sense, to be part of that fight, but also the censorship is very real and very felt and actually terrifying.
Absolutely, thank you so much, Tanya. Is there anybody else? I think we still have a little bit more time here. Ooh. All right, well, if you don't, I think we're going to finish with some words from one of our publications that Norhan actually translated into English, the words of a longtime political prisoner, Omar Berrada. And we just hope that you've enjoyed hearing all this. I know that it has meant a lot of us to be able to speak so openly about this, even though I can definitely say, just for the sake of thinking of censorship, that all three of us had to think hard about what we would actually want to come up here and if we want to say the things we want to say. Because even though it feels safe enough to do this and do your work at Printed Matter, whether it be talking about PAC-B and worrying about if Printed Matter would ever want to affiliate with us again, or worrying about that these videos somehow get online with our names on it and what country somehow cares about that, we all had our own considerations.
Yeah, definitely. I'm just going to read a little bit from this latest project. The thing that kept me most sane during this time was translating Omar's writings. Over 26 years that he spent in prison for allegedly carrying out an operation against a soldier. He writes chants, he writes protest songs, and he writes a short story that really, if you get the chance just to read, if you pass by our booth and see, it's very short, but it really gives you a whole cosmology of how he grew up, to really see the injustice that was upon him. So I'm gonna read a few lines from Words for Palestine, and then we can wrap up. This world moves towards absence. This world returns to presence. Everything collapses and remerges. Everything is possible and impossible. Palestinian temporality penetrates the impossible, and Palestinian joy fills the burning streets. Palestine is in the prison cell, holding the sun in its palm, and in its heart, the hope of the world. It carries the songs of children, their happiness, and the sober memory. This is the anguish, the difficulty, that cuffed hands are supposed to be the window to freedom. This is the loneliness of being the only redeemer. To know that these frozen nights are our path to the sun, to daylight. Palestine rose, announcing its own resurrection, restoring to elucidation its long-lost language. It was the first to give millions the license to violate deformed laws, the laws that split the soldier in half and the streets in half. Palestine was the first to restore to the East its laws, and the path to Palestine became the only law. On this earth, resurrection happens every day. Relationships fall and rise, and Palestine was always forbidden to them. It is now evident that the Palestine they are trying to lay siege to is a circle whose diameter is death. It tore through the belt that splits the world in half, rich and poor, masters and slaves, oppressors and oppressed, occupiers and resistors. Palestine has transgressed the circumference of siege, nulling all calculations. Palestine is the emblem of the resurrection of the East and the history of its insurrection. Thank you. Thank you all.
All right, thank you everybody. We hope you enjoyed the talk, and if you want to catch any of us on the side or outside or want to buy anything from us, we got it right here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oradan geçişi sendeyiz o zaman.
Ama biraz kötü.
O zaman 5-10 dakika bekleyelim. Laptop biraz daha bu tarafa alma şansınız var. Hi. We will wait 5-10 minutes. Yeah. The fair is also. My mic is on. A friend. She's here for the next hour, I guess. Yeah. Oh. I have to stay away from this stuff. We live in Berlin.
Biraz beklememiz gerekiyor.
5-10 dakika. Ha? Aynen. Bunu ne kadar okusam? atlayayım. Şuraya atlayabilirim.
Tamam.
Tamam, mantıklı. Lemon cutters. Manifesto. E15 miydi koltuğumuz? Ha? Önemli değil zaten, insan unutacak ama. Heh. İyi, ben artık şey yapıyorum. Öyle mi? Kaç? 10 geçiyor zaten. Bence akademik şey üstünde oldu. İstanbul'da oturuyorum. Onlara da. Vay. Editten çıkmak mı istiyorsun? Hı? Şu an editlerimiz. Oh, ben gidiyorum. Başlamamız gerekiyor. Haber ver. Başlayabiliriz.
Sen başlasın. İstanbul. İstanbul'dan bir ilk söyler misin?
Hi everyone, thanks for coming. We are Gedacht Publishing. My name is Eren Ileri, and
My name is Ipek Burçak.
we are from we are an artist collective duo, publisher from Berlin, and yeah, a bit about ourselves.
Yeah, maybe this one. This is our logo. Gedacht Publishing is a collective publisher founded by us as a spin-off of Gedacht Records, record label. We publish artist publications in collaboration with fellow artists living in Europe as part of diaspora communities. Our output varies from books and zines to EPUB, from sound storage to performative formats. Our presentation will be more or less like a book presentation. This is our latest publication, Gedacht Publishing Communism Reader. And we will introduce a few contributions from the publication.
Yeah, to start, what brought us to this idea, I would like to share a little bit of our thoughts. Communism Reader came into existence because of various reasons, like why, as artist publishers, we had this idea. Is most often, in contemporary art, when political discourse takes shape, it's often in very abstract form, concepts such as decolonization and etc. Decoloniality. These are always discussed in like in a rather detached form from political events or realities. So, and like more often than not, people tend to have like discuss things in shorter historical perspectives, like without connecting maybe like a little bit more the histories behind it. So we had this idea to collect some contributions about like various anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, anti-colonialist struggles from mostly from the global south. And also both of us being from Turkey, we are very much familiar with certain histories, and we wanted to connect, after realizing that these histories have connections with other places in the global south, we wanted to make a publication like this, and the contributors are almost all either live in Berlin or in some time of their life have been in Berlin. So that's also one thing that motivated us for this publication, was like this the situation of Berlin as a diaspora center, but which is also being shaken nowadays, since in the last 6 months, since the Gaza genocide and the reaction of the Berlin or the German state, which Germany openly supporting the genocide, made Berlin and the most obviously the art scene a bit precarious or repressed. That's why we felt a bit more the urgency to publish something like this. And I guess we will read some sections from different contributions.
Yes. We will start with a contribution that is actually an interview with Emrah Cilasun, who was a communist born in Turkey, living in Berlin since the 80s. We met, first we watched the documentary he was part of, made by Redfish Media, about the anti-communist massacres in Indonesia. There he presents his research he made on Germany's role in these massacres in Indonesia. He studied a great number of documents at the German Foreign Ministry, and he finds out that Germany was very much involved in these massacres and supported very actively, as proven in the documents. In the interview, he gives some examples. I will read a few paragraphs from the interview. In the Redfish documentary film, we show a document from a meeting at the German embassy in Jakarta. The experts, according to the document, stated, "The situation is catastrophic. Indonesia can become a springboard for the spread of communism. We must intervene." After the Second World War, the Federal Republic of Germany never carried out a denazification campaign, contrary to what is officially claimed and written. Tons of documents and names prove this. So many old Nazi bureaucrats were involved in building the Republic as part of the Adenauer government in the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Interior, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Ideologically, they were always on the side of the West, and today a power in the Western imperialist alliance, and this power is decidedly anti-communist. In the 50s, the first government of the Democratic Republic closed down the KPD, Communist Party of Germany, and banned certain professions for party members. After 1945, they brought back the capital they had taken abroad and the gold that they had taken from the Jews back to Germany. Germany also slowly began to rebuild with the help of the Marshall Plan. In my research, I realized that Germany could lend money to Indonesia less than 20 years after the war. How could they be so capable? The term Trümmerfrauen, the rubble woman, is taught in schools and to new immigrants in Germany, and the myth of women carrying bricks and building the country after the war. Did they build the country? The capital they brought abroad, the Marshall Plan, and the restoration of German industry gradually rebuilt German imperialism. With a labor shortage, they brought in people from Portugal, Greece, Yugoslavia, and Turkey. They initially housed the workers in a concentration camp near Munich with the slogan Arbeit macht frei on the door. What an absurdity. During my research, I also realized that Germany granted Indonesia massive loans and obliged Indonesia to buy certain weapons from Tucson, for example. In this way, their money flowed back to Germany. We must also not fall into the typical left-wing delusion and assume that the imperialists are only interested in money. The possibility that Indonesia could be a stepping stone to communism was important to them. So they created an indebted Indonesia and chained it to themselves. They thought that if they didn't give money, Indonesia would move closer to China and wanted to prevent that. Documents show that they removed the made in Germany and NATO marks on the weapons before sending them to Indonesia. Germany has done it again. Oh, sorry. For example, in Mexico, about 200 university students were murdered with Heckler and Koch weapons. It is forbidden to sell these weapons there. They do it like this. They give licenses to a third country, set up a company X in that third country, and sell them through company X, just like they did. After the war, the USA banned Germany from selling weapons to war or crisis zones. They prohibited Germany from possessing nuclear weapons. We proved this fact with the documents. They sent so many weapons during the massacres in Indonesia. Just recently, there were elections in Indonesia. The ex-son-in-law of Suharto, the general who committed the massacre in East Timor, was trained in Germany with the GSG-9, a special counterterrorism unit that was established in Germany in the early 70s. As we mentioned in the documentary, the Indonesian Secret Service was trained in Germany, and Germany pursued the opponents from Indonesia. Reinhard Gehlen, who killed many communists, gathered information together with the CIA. So Germany was ready to participate in the anti-communism game actively.
Now, in the background of this, in the early 1970s, in connection with global events, revolutionary ideas spread very quickly among students and workers in Turkey. In my opinion, I would have wished that the left-wing revolutionaries from Turkey had brought the voice and inspiration of class struggle in Turkey and in the region into German society as well. Instead, they limited their reach to the diasporic communities from Turkey. The movement I came from, ATİF, Federation of Workers from Turkey in Germany, and ATÖF, Federation of Students from Turkey in Germany, both had Marxist-Leninist background, stemming from the Communist Party of Turkey, Marxist-Leninists. In the 1980s, we participated in many movements, from the movement against the deployment of Pershing missiles in Germany to the campaign against the nuclear power plant Wackersdorf. But as I said, in the back of our minds, we thought we were there as revolutionaries from Turkey in solidarity with the Germans. That was the problem. Well, some people like me began to change their minds. In those years, a group from the USA came to Germany called the Brigade for a World Without Imperialism. They were punks, feminists, anarchist youth, and revolutionary communists. They came here under the leadership of the RCP USA, the Revolutionary Communist Party. In 1983, we started protesting together against the deployment of Pershing missiles in Germany. This brigade changed many things in my mind. They began to criticize us, saying that as internationalists, we should no longer just identify ourselves as revolutionaries from Turkey or elsewhere, and that it will be impossible to change anything if we continue to organize in that way. So as this was the interview with the historian Emrah Cilasun, and to continue, we have another contribution from researcher and writer Sanabel Abdelrahman. She's a Berlin-based writer, and she holds a PhD in Arabic studies with a focus on Palestinian magical realism. And she's interested in questions around alternative literature, reprocessing traditional figures into contemporary literature, and studying fictional and distorted spaces. In her contribution to our publication, she analyzed the Hasbara posters of the kibbutzim settlements, and like her essay's title is Colonial Practices of quote-unquote socialist Zionist projects, kibbutzim and Hasbara posters. And yeah, I'm going to read a section from this essay. Redwashing and Marxist failures. The redwashing of kibbutzim and other socialist arrangements in the settler colonial Zionist state not only washes or attempts to the invisible blood of Palestinians of the shiny new buildings and quaint, nostalgic communist spaces, but serves to eradicate the history of the place and the Palestinians completely. Amid this fatal complicity of civilians in the murderous practices of the state, a simple, ludicrous nuance emerges. In this day and age, socialism takes on different forms. The class struggle will always and forever be at its core, but classism emerges on various fronts. Israel's attempts to tether its founding myth on an ancient claim to Palestinian land through performative agrarian practices, while labeling those attempts as quote-unquote socialist, in order to recreate a proverbial image of old-school socialism, is an example. Socialism is not about decimating neighbors to play farmer, but about working together, communally, intensely, incessantly, against an exploitative system that abuses not only the land and its people, but also the people's histories, cultures, arts, and social networks. What Zionist settlers achieve, but by reproducing these images that provoke ethereal utopias, is mere exploitation of socialist imagery, a facile 76-year-old attempt at a material reenactment of land connections that Palestinians have been cultivating for hundreds of years. Even abroad, even in exile, even in perennial waiting, Palestinians have been cultivating their connections to their land through memory, through love, through longing for a return to their righteous spaces so that the severed body becomes whole again. In Magical Marxism, Andy Merrifield proposes a magical Marxism instead of a rigid material Marxism, one that revolves around a more experimental in its extravagant subjectivity, more battle-trained in its magical imagination. It will be activism that is somehow at once classical and postmodern, a new retro Marxism, angrier and more realistic than the generations that gave us surrealism. This stream of Marxism will help us, Merrifield argues, construct a constellation of better, liberated futures that are not a mere protraction of the current state of capitalist degradation, crystallized most essentially in Israel's settler colonialism. Rather, a magical Marxism that is deeply rooted in the fantastic kaleidoscope of the global solidarities for Palestine that have been unfolding since October. Because as the protest chants go, Palestine is freeing us all indeed.
Another contribution from the collective Alpas Filipinas. They write about food justice movements in the Philippines, and I will read just one paragraph from the text. Bunkalan, from Tagalog verb bunkal, to till, is the practice of direct farming on unjustly undistributed and untilled land. It was born out of material and immediate need for food, whether to sustain picketers during plantation strikes or the tiempo muerto from Spanish dead time, a systematic period of starvation imposed on seasonal sugarcane farmers and their families during the off-season. By growing local subsistence crops within the monocultures, bunkalan becomes a form of guerrilla resistance to the capitalist global food economy that the plantations feed. It has since evolved into a form of peasant-led environmentalism, developing and democratizing locally rooted organic farming practices. As the state continues to fail to redistribute land to the landless, bunkalan is the physical and practical incarnation of protest, where farmers assert their rights by occupying disputed land. Today, there are more than 6,000 hectares of bunkalan, where seeds of not only food but also political ideas are planted, nurtured, and shared. And we will continue with another contribution from the artist Hasan Özgür Top.
Hasan Özgür Top is he created a photo comic revolving around an event like a murder of two revolutionaries in early 90s by the police during a police raid. And I think like he's also an artist coming from our both of us generation, and the 19th in Turkey had I guess had a particular place for our generation, like who were born in the 80s, because after the 1980 military coup in Turkey, most left movements were struggling and almost ceased to exist during the 80s and 80s. After the 80s, there was a huge, like big implementation of neoliberal policies in Turkey. So 90s were the time where those neoliberal policies were showing its effects, and in that climate, the left was like barely trying to survive. So I guess that's why that's one of the reasons he showed interest in the story of these two revolutionaries that is not really like almost like an unrecorded history of the struggles from that time. So I will read a section. The revolutionary leftist movements that emerged in Turkey in the early 1970s were dealt a heavy blow by the military coup of March 12, 1971, and lost a significant part of their leading cadres. After 1974, the organizations that had revived, diversified, and multiplied were once again faced with defeat in the 1980 coup d'etat. After the September 12, 1980 coup, hundreds of thousands of people were detained. Tens of thousands of people were tortured to death and disappeared. Hundreds were killed in clashes. Dozens of revolutionary prisoners died or were killed in the resistance movements against the junta's subjugation practices in prisons. In 1983, the military junta handed over power to a new neoliberal conservative leader, Turgut Özal. Özal was the deputy prime minister in charge of the economy in the coup government. Under the military junta, Özal was opening Turkey to the world. All this was accomplished by technological innovations and the introduction of new consumer goods. One of the consequences of the country's quote-unquote opening up to the outside world. Televisions and telephones became widespread. Devices such as pagers, computers, and faxes were becoming common knowledge. Turkey was changing rapidly. Towards the end of the 1980s, youth movements, particularly in Istanbul, were trying to revive. After 1988, the anti-fascist struggle manifested itself in many neighborhoods, university dormitories, campuses, and partly in factories. A section of the youth, born in the early 70s, when revolutionary leftist organizations had emerged on the stage of history, and who had grown up under the military junta, was trying to tear the shackles of the junta. Alper Ersoy and Gülay Arıcı. The names sound familiar, but I can't remember it at first. Then Cihangir raid, he says. And yes, the pieces come together in my mind. Berlin, May 2022. I will spend the rest of my days in Berlin on the other side of the city, in different Francis houses. The next day, I move here. It is a collective living space. In the evening, we sit in the kitchen and chat. I have the chance to meet the people who live in the space. One is someone who spent the late 80s and 90s in Istanbul. He talks about the collective houses that emerged in Beyoğlu in Istanbul in the late 80s. These places were where anarchist youth met and lived together. As I think, here is someone who lived in the same period and the same city as a person I was chatting with the day before, but in a different environment. He says, 2 of his friends were killed by the police in Cihangir. Alper and Gülay, I suddenly ask. While he is surprised that I know this, I am amazed that I was told about Gülay and Alper one day after the other by 2 people who have nothing to do with each other. Beyoğlu, March 2024. I'm in Beyoğlu, Cihangir. I'm heading towards Başkurt Street, looking for the Manço apartment. The weather is hot. Summer is coming early now. The street with sidewalks full of trees is very quiet. Cats are dozing lazily. I find the Manço apartment. I have a hard time recognizing it and matching it with the photographs in the news clippings. After taking a few photos of the building, I walk away. What am I doing here?
Lastly, this is my contribution. It is an excerpt from stochastic datasets. That is my ongoing project on medical AI and the future with its future within the healthcare system. It is inspired by the Socialist Patients Collective that was active in the late 70s in Germany. It also includes some excerpts from their manifesto. I will read short paragraphs. Illness is the condition and result of the relations of production and capitalism. As a result of capitalist relation of production, illness in its developed form as a protest of life against capitalism is a revolutionary productive power for all human beings. Illness is the only form in which life in capitalism is possible. Everybody can suddenly get ill. All are patients by possibility. You easily can realize that if you cast a glance at the social security taxes you are obliged to pay. Health is nothing but a biologistic, narcissistic figment of the mind. The state-organized healthcare system has the task of protecting capitalism and the social order against the sick, and not the other way around, of protecting the population struck by illness against the illness-creating conditions and the murderous violence of capitalism. In the future of capitalism, everyone will be sick or disabled. Despite the optimistic facade of eugenic and transhumanist imagination about perfect human beings, life extension, about regenerative medicine, neural implants, and the merging of the human and machine, the fact is that we can expect more disabilities in the future, not less. The recently occupied pharmacy factory Pfizer and collaboration with our comrades with the South African collective drug producers against patents sets an example for international solidarity and restoration of patients' rights. Our comrades have overtaken the production and are already producing drugs without patents. German capitalist state that is trying to repress but will not be able to stop this. Health apps that were integrated into the failing antisocial security systems are designed as traps for racialized working class sick people to get to know them better and to manipulate them in turn. They are the dead end of the broken down relationship between patient and doctor. In our socialist future, technology will be a mere tool to achieve the goals of alliances and the People's United Revolutionary Movement. Nothing more, nothing less. This is like a speculative piece, an excerpt of the piece. And
yeah, with this, I guess this was all we wanted to share from the publication. But if you want to see it, buy it eventually. If you're interested in it, or in our other stuff, also you can see in our at our booth E15, I think, third floor, across the street. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
broader context and stuff like that. And I was wondering if you're familiar with Gabriel Rockhill and his critical theory workshop.
No.
It's been really interesting and instructive for me because he deals exactly with that topic. And I think he's based in Philadelphia, and he was a student of Derrida's, and then he came to an awakening of how the complicity of post-structuralist and postmodern theory in kind of basically the neoliberal project, and it very much overlaps with my own experience coming from a multi-generational communist or communist-related family, and then having my liberation through postmodernism art school, which seemed so radical, and then I realized how it was not only not how much in alignment with basic liberal, like whatever Western liberalism it is, but Rockhill investigates and explores how that project was very much engineered, and including with CIA funding and other kinds of things, who promoted the kind of anti-Marxist, anti-communist intellectuals that made up the bulk, including the Frankfurt School and stuff like that, that made up the bulk of what is the core curriculum of art students in the common language.
Yeah.
And I think culminates in a form of postmodern identity politics that are divorced from, historical materialism.
Yes.
And so it's been really useful for me, and I first came to the realization about the fraud or the Kool-Aid of postmodernism when the first Gulf War happened, and the subsequent ones happened, and seeing in our world that could be very invested in different like liberation or symbolic like form or I don't know, radical signifiers and stuff like that is deeply, deeply entrenched in basically the imperialist superstructure. And then the remaining the other West Asia, Middle East wars that continued, and especially post collapse of Soviet Union, the intensification of never-ending wars, one after the other, in the West Asian region and North African region, just reaffirms that. And then right now we have Ukraine and Gaza as the two focal points of emerging World War III, in order to preserve U.S. Western hegemony. And so anyway, I think it's great. It's great, to see imperialism re-entering the discourse of the younger generation, as opposed to things like decoloniality and that kind of obfuscate, I feel, in putting it into the super academic discourse and taking it away from material conditions and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Basically, the inevitable decline of whatever question of supremacy and stuff. But anyway, I'll visit your booth and chat later.
Thank you.
Sure. I don't know if you have any
We will love to. Thanks for the comment.
I recommend Gabriel Rockhill. You look him up on YouTube, and they do really interesting seminars and workshops and stuff online. And he has a great critique of contemporary fascism and its links to historical fascism.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, yeah, then if there are no other comments or questions, thanks for coming, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey there. I'm just going to try to open up a PowerPoint on this. Let me see. I guess I'll log out of this person's Gmail, log into mine.
Are you going to email it to
Oh, I've already emailed it to myself, so I'll just log in. I do too. Use another cat. No, it's just going to be like a visual PowerPoint going on. This can run PowerPoint, right?
What can you show things on there?
The same things that we showed. Oh shit! I better remember my Gmail.
I'll let you do it.
Oh, that's good. I'm always happy to hear that.
You can sit right here in the middle.
Hey, what about the paintings?
Oh, the paintings. Let's get the paintings up.
Yeah, well, we just up on the table and I can get them out.
All right. Where are they? They're in here.
Right here.
In this box, right here.
Right there.
Okay, there we go.
Now close this up.
Okay, I'll close it up. We got your paintings right here, Ben.
And take this is for hanging them.
Okay. You know what? We can ask volunteer Matthew Damhave. Would you help hang some paintings by Ben Morea behind us as part of this talk and performance? Welcome everybody. Thank you for coming and making time in your afternoon for this talk as part of the classroom at the New York Art Book Fair. We have the pleasure of inviting Ben Morea, a good friend of mine, and an artist, and a figure who will be familiar to many of you because of his involvement in various movements, moments, and conversations with the so-called New Left and broader liberation movements of the 1960s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s. Ben has, in many ways, embodied the principles and the ethics of that time like few other figures. And we also have in the room with us today Donald Nicholson-Smith, who is a literary translator and also someone who has been involved in movements and moments going back to the middle of the 1960s himself. And the impetus for this conversation really, in many ways, has been my curiosity about what does it mean to build a movement that's non-hierarchical, where really you have this form of insistence on liberation, insistence on change, and kind of redetermining, reformatting, the structures that govern our daily lives, but doing it in a way where, I guess, if there are power relationships, those power relationships are clear and determined democratically as opposed to hierarchically, or in some way that's obscure or opaque. So, in other words, we're here to talk about a time in the middle of the 1960s when these two individuals were both involved in similar, I guess, circles of concern, but different geographies and different maybe group formations. In 1966 and 1967, Donald was involved in Paris with the Situationist International, and at that same time, Ben was involved in a group of artists known really as Black Mask, in reference to the publication Black Mask that they were creating. Donald and Ben corresponded with one another through the mail, and they also had a conversation between Black Mask and King Mob that really took place in the pages of those two different journals. And that's really fascinating to me as an archivist and someone who's involved in the preservation of these conversations and moments. So that's really the frame that I wanted to bring to your attention if you're wondering why the three of us are here talking today. And I would really like to invite Donald and Ben to really do most of the conversation, and perhaps to introduce themselves by way of remembering what it was they were up to in 1967 and what kinds of publications they were making and what were their chief concerns. And then we're going to move really, I think, to a conversation about what's happening right now and about direct action and about the politics and poetics of direct action, at a time when, there is a tremendous amount of confusion and chaos in the conversation about Israel and Palestine in the popular press and the popular media. So how is it that we can cut through that confusion and speak clearly to one another through, I think, things like public protest and performance, and also publication and electronic communication. So that's kind of the structure of what I'd like us to talk about for the next 45 minutes to an hour. And we really will be inviting questions from the audience, both about the history of the 1960s and about our time. So Ben, tell me a little bit about what it was you were up to and what it was you were thinking about around 1967, 1968, when I've encountered letters from you around that time.
Don't put that mic. I can't stand mics. Can you guys hear me? Yeah. Well, then we could do it out the mic. That's the most elitist item, like people that have mics, they think they have power. Yeah, and that's why I don't want it.
But you need it for the recording. Otherwise, it's overwhelmed with room tone.
Well, you'll be okay without them. Well, you'll be okay. The mic will pick up enough of it.
Yeah.
If Ben's comfortable talking without a mic, he doesn't have to talk with the mic. So
Fix it in post.
We'll fix it in post.
Anyway, it's kind of ironic question because in '67, and that sounds simplistic, but we only thought about one thing actually, and that was revolution. What was the steps we needed to take to bring to that? We felt it was possible for that to happen. Around the world, youth was in rebellion all around the world. Like in Europe, the different movements like Red Brigades and different, in Germany, and we felt it was imminent. I mean, it might sound foolish at this point today, but we really felt that we could change the system that existed. And that's all we thought about. We got up in the morning just thinking about maybe it was our day to die. I mean, we were dedicated fighters. Like the Vietnam, to our generation, to us, Vietnam was so hideous and odious, and it was being done in our name, that we felt it either ends, that we help end it, or we die. I mean, that's how we felt. And it's almost, sounds, but that's how we felt. And everything we did was to lead to that. So, but it wasn't only the struggle. Like, we weren't only fighting in the streets, but we were building a community that could then replace what we thought we would bring down.
I really want to come back to that idea that you were building a community, so it wasn't just a negative struggle, there was a positive developmental horizon of something new. But before we come back to that, I really want to invite Donald to think back to that year 1967, 1968, and where was it that you were, and what was the shape of the struggle for your circle at that time?
Well, I'm going to seize the power. Although we never set out to seize power.
Have a
ostensibly,
right here.
ostensibly, community was going to replace the need for the seizure of power. However, at the beginning of '67, I was a situationist in Paris, and I moved to England, I have to say back to England, that summer. Theoretically, I say theoretically because it didn't happen, to produce a English edition of the French Situationist Journal. Until that point, and since 1965, two years or so earlier, I'd been a member of this small group called the Situationist International. We were never more than about 12 people, and they produced a journal every so often. 12 issues came out. So the plan was that I would return to England and help some English comrades there produce an English edition. It would have been #1. And we worked a lot on that. And the people that we joined up with over there, I actually returned to England with Tim Clark, who had also been a Parisian and a member of the Situations International for quite a while. So we returned to London with the idea of starting an English journal like the French one, while remaining members of the Situations International. So that was the beginning of '67, or sometime in maybe the spring of '67. And then the people with whom we connected were Chris Gray and Dave and Stuart Wise and a motley bunch of other people. Only Charles Radcliffe, and I think he was the only person who was actually at that time, and Chris Gray, who became Situationist officially at the same time as in that year. Both Chris Gray and the Wise twins had been to America, and a lot of what they were interested in was connecting with the Americans that they have met there. Ben was one, especially for Dave Wise, who spent the summer of '67, the same year, in company with Ben and his band, along with Murray Bookchin, who was part of the same circle at that time. Ben can clarify that because afterwards they parted ways to some degree, but they were very close at that time in the middle of 1967. In America in 1967, the whole country was in an absolute uproar. It wasn't just a bunch of radicals running around. The whole country was in a moment of incipient counterculture, anti-Vietnam War demonstrations, massive movements of demonstrations in Washington, two big ones especially. So that was the context. And these people that I joined up with in London came back that late summer, especially Dave Wise, full of information and very great affection for Ben and for what was then Black Mask, and was soon to become Up Against the Wall Motherfucker, when they decided to be a little less theoretical and go into the streets, which was the change that represented by the shift from Black Mask to Up Against the Wall Motherfucker. Those were the themes in 1967 for me, and the publications involved, because we're here at a book fair, a book event, and it's important to know that the background to that was, first of all, from Chicago, the Chicago Surrealists and various connected groups who produced something called Rebel Worker. They had 6 issues, and the 7th issue was produced in the UK by Charles Radcliffe, who was then, by this time, a Situationist. So those people, so in other words, we were part of a network by this time. By the end of the year of '67, those people that were in England working theoretically on this new magazine were excluded from the Situations International for various reasons. The main reason was the Situationist sort of central committee, so to speak, they don't like the expression, but let's call it the Central Committee for Facility, had decided they wanted to have an American section, but they couldn't decide what American group would fit the bill to be totally proper orthodox Situationists. And the British, we were never a section. All the people who write about this claim that there was a section. There was never any official British section. However, we happened to be in England at that time, and we disagreed rather strongly with the idea that we should pick certain characters in America to become fully fledged situationists. And because we objected to that approach, we were sacked. We were expelled. And I think really correctly, because we didn't share that idea at all. We felt that the way to organize was to let people join together with not a complete orthodox creed, but actually, by virtue of their action and their writing and their drawings, their pictures and their activity, because we wanted them and not to be too sectarian about it, and keep connection with as many people that we approved of as possible. So we were on a totally different page to the then Parisian-based Situationist Central Committee. Okay, so that was the cause of our being ejected.
That's not completely the whole picture, though.
Well, I'm waiting
First
for you.
of all, he says Central Committee. It was not a Central Committee, it was a dictatorship run by Guy Debord. Guy Debord was the most autocratic, dominant, control freak that ever existed. Like, he had really brilliant people around him. And he himself was a fairly brilliant guy. But number one, he was alcoholic, which didn't help. Two, he was a major ego freak, which didn't help. But anyway, so they sent Tony, a Dutch gentleman named Tony Verlaan to stay with us for a while before the people he mentioned from England came. And Tony Verlaan, I understood later, contacted him and said, because they were thinking, they thought we were situation. They addressed me that way. Guy Debord addressed me that way in writing. Like, he felt that. But Tony Verlaan contacted him and said, you don't know what these people are. They're action freaks. They have no theory, no idiot. Like, the situation is bogged down in the theoretical world. And he was telling them, these people, you don't know what they're really like. So Guy Debord sent, what's his name?
Verlaan. Verlaan, Tony Verlaan.
No, but then they sent his second in command.
Vannegham.
So he sent Vannegham to see me and to talk with us about the Tony Verlaan message and to see how real that was, and in fact, if we should be rejected, which we couldn't care less. So when
but you're still talking about it.
When what's his name? Not Verlaan, the other one.
Vannegham.
When Vannegham arrived to talk with us, I was, I don't know where, but I was out doing something at demonstration, I don't know. So he met a member of our group who was a poet named Alan Hoffman, who was really close to Murray Bookchin. It was Murray Bookchin felt that his future would be turned over to Alan. That was his main disciple. I mean, he just loved him. And it crushed him when Alan rather joined with us rather than staying with Murray. It really crushed him personally. But anyway, so when Vannegham got there, he met with Alan. I wasn't around. And Alan had a somewhat mystical, he's a poet. And we were not mysticism. And he got the impression that Alan was too mystical, and he contacted the board, and they accused me of being a mystic. First of all, he didn't even meet me, so he was accusing me of being a mystic based on meeting Alan. But I wrote to him, I said, how can you be too mystical? I mean, it's like a contradiction. It's you could be not mystical enough. And that was Karl Marx's major problem. He wasn't mystical enough. And we've been suffering ever since. That's how we ended up with Stalin and now Putin. And it's all a result of the Marxist anti-mysticism.
I think we could go really deep into this point, and this isn't something I want to stop us from exploring further. But since we have maybe a total of another 20 or 30 minutes, I want to kind of move into, what happened after this, because not only were you rejected, Ben, for being too mystical, but as I encountered in the letters that were in Donald's archives, as some of you may know, I work on placing people's papers. I encountered Ben. I had known since about 2017 when we worked on an exhibition called "The Spirit of the People Will Be Stronger Than the Pig's Technology" at Fournier Gallery, and I reproduced a poster that Ben had made. And Donald I met when we kind of understood that Yale University was interested in acquiring his archives related to the translation of Situationist text. And on the first day I arrived at Donald's house, I started opening up files, and I saw letters from Ben explaining exactly this situation where there was this confusion about, what was direct action, what was mysticism, what was theoretically appropriate. And it was fascinating for me to encounter these two friends of mine talking to each other in 1967 through the letters, and then also eventually through their publications, because Black Mask, in many ways, precedes and sort of helps bring into, I would say, being, the ethos of King Mob, right? And so
totally,
because Donald, after this moment where you and Chris Gray and maybe Tim Clark disagreed really around this whole exclusion and disagreed about this whole episode, you also were rejected from the SITs. Is that right?
Yes.
And that really was part of the precipitation of that, right?
Well, it had to do with Ben in part, yes.
Exactly, it had to do with Ben in part.
But the other thing is that we agreed with being excluded.
You were happy to be excluded.
Well, happy. I don't know. We weren't happy, but we agreed with it.
You agreed that you needed to part
ways.
Well,
we wanted to part ways. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. We should clarify this word of rejection and exclusion. And Guy Debord expelled every single person in the Situationists. And at the end, there was just one man left. And then Guy Debord expelled himself. He committed suicide. He expelled himself. So that's how
he didn't commit suicide for many years.
He was.
He didn't commit suicide for many years after he expelled himself.
But I appreciate what's being described here. And again,
yes.
This is so rich. I
well,
feel like
it's just
hours of talking
I'm
about
ready.
this.
Well,
But what I really want to do is because I've had the privilege now to spend time with both of you as individuals and also with the documents you created. So I want to talk about this relationship between King Mob and the King Mob Circle in London, which Donald, after you agreed to part ways with Situationist International, you were very much associated with something called King Mob, and King Mob Echo was a publication that you helped to produce, right?
Yes.
With Chris Gray and David Stewart Wise.
Yes.
And Tim Clark and others. And what I found when I started looking at King Mob,
it was a copy of Black Mask.
Well, it was directly related to Black Mask, but you look behind us right here, we see the cover of King Mob #3. It says "Motherfucker is a werewolf."
Yeah.
Which is directly related to Black Mask and to the idea of what the motherfuckers were doing in New York City, right?
Exactly.
So there's this conversation that happens through the mail, and there's this getting to know one another through these two parallel circles that are similar aims but different methodologies and different ways of handling themselves. And then there's this new emergence that happens in London around 68. I think the first issue of King Mob, issue number 1, maybe I'll go back to the cover of that, comes out in April of 1968. It's what I think it says on the back cover.
I can't remember.
Well, anyways, early in 68, right? And so, you know, it has its own attitude, it has its own praxis. But
Yeah,
it's
that's
really,
right. 68, yeah.
Yeah, but it's really talking about also student occupations that had happened in New York and that happened in London. It's talking about the limits of student power. It's talking about, you know, if you look at this issue, King Mob number 2, Letters on Student Power, it could be addressing students in the Quad at Columbia today, or students at Emory, or students at USC, because it is really about what happens once you seize a university. If you want to have a festival in the Quad, that's one thing, but what does it mean to take full possession of the ideological machine of higher education? And so this is a very sophisticated and nuanced conversation about student power that starts happening in the King Mob circle. But issue number 3 of King Mob is directly and fully about a reckoning with Black Mask, right? And,
exactly.
And did you see that issue, Ben, when it came out?
Yeah.
And how did you receive that when you saw issue 3 of King Mob, which was basically an article about you, really?
I felt that that was the justification for my feeling of situationists being using our material. King Mob using our material.
But by that point, the members of King Mob weren't situationists
No,
anymore. But they were. Dave and Stuart Wise, were they your friends? Were they your comrades?
Yeah.
Because I even see their name on certain Black Mask publications and certain things that
They
you did.
stayed with us for a while.
Yeah, and so their names are sometimes listed as King Mob, and sometimes their names are listed as Black Mask. And so they were travelers in between both worlds. So did you feel that Black Mask or Up Against the Wall Motherfucker and King Mob were allied groups? Did you feel like a sense of connection?
Totally, they were parallel. And Chris Gray, you know, just before he passed, he had written that the
Number 3.
Huh?
He wrote number 3.
Yeah.
Yes.
And he had said somewhere online that it was a lot of it came from us.
Well, of course it did.
Material. And
Did you feel it was useful? That there was an amplification of your material and your methods in a different praxis by a different group of people?
like totally, because to us it wasn't an ego. It wasn't like it's our material. It was material that might help bring down this edifice that is upon us.
Right.
That controlled every aspect of our life. So to us it was a tool. So we were happy somebody else was using the tool. Right. If we didn't feel it's our tool and you can't use it,
right.
we
Well,
wanted it used.
listen, Ben, the whole relationship of that paper to your organization was one of admiration.
Yeah.
So how can that be bad? It was good.
No, it couldn't be.
You know, it should be taken as a compliment. It had
We
nothing
did.
to...
I never
plus,
felt-
No, and plus, it had nothing to do with the situations
Right.
in that respect. But that paper, King Mo, also inherited other things from the situationists, and other things from the Chicago Surrealists, which was a very important influence because of Charlie Radcliffe and Rebel Worker, which had been going on for quite some time before I arrived in London. And that was another source of stuff that came into that. Now, the other thing about, the other thing that has to be said about that group called King Mob was that they also did a lot of action. They had a lot of action going on in London. They invaded Selfridges and they gave away. Now that was a bit of a compliment to Macy's Milling. Did you have to do with Macy's Milling?
Well, yeah, we carried it out.
Can you tell the story?
Tell us what Macy's Milling.
I mean, because nobody cares about all these personalities. I call them Parisianisme. We don't have to worry about what somebody said.
You know,
but the fact is, what about to talk about the Macy's Milling?
well, you know, that obviously was a successful effort. But even more important, I felt we were the only people in history ever to break into the Pentagon, to literally fight our way
Through the back door.
with the troops.
You
yes.
went in the back door.
And then when they realized we had, they stormed in and they beat us out.
Do you guys know about
There's
this
a-
episode? This is a pretty famous episode, but during the human being, the attempt to levitate the Pentagon by the hippies, who are all gathered in the front with the National Guard facing off against the crowd, that was a distraction that Ben and his group used to kick in the back door and start smashing up the Pentagon.
And we felt that was the next step. Like the effort of protest was over. It was going to be now obstruction. Like when we occupied Columbia, we booby trapped the building so that the police couldn't empty the building. There were 5 buildings held, and we held 1, and SDS held 3, and the black students held 1. 4 of the buildings, the police expelled the occupants violently. They beat them, put a lot of them in the hospital. And we held the 5th building, and we told the police that in fact we were waiting for them. We invited them, come expel us. We had the building so booby-trapped that the police would not enter the building. It was never attacked. It was never occupied forcefully by the police.
How did they know it was booby-trapped?
What?
How did they know it was booby-trapped? You tell them? Who told them?
They had spies are you kidding?
So they knew.
The whole thing is,
So
I mean, they still have, maybe there's
Wait a minute, was it
several spies here. Hi, spy. I mean, they have spies they knew it was booby-trapped.
They knew it, okay.
And, well, when we invited them, said, come on, take us out. And they wouldn't. It's obvious they knew. I mean, we had furniture on the ceiling with ropes so that when people came, first of all, we eliminated the elevator. We disarmed the elevator so they could not work. They had to come in on the steps. And over all the steps was furniture that could be pulled by a rope and dropped. Then we had the fire hoses, which we took off, and we had the fire axes, and we had made shields and clubs with the axes that broke up furniture. So it was so they wouldn't come near it, and they came to the bottom and said, maybe can we negotiate?
So I just want to jump in here and maybe talk about, what Donald was raising was about the Macy's Mill-In, where we're going to talk about some symbolic, maybe street theater protest actions. And what you've been pointing to is that there was a moment for Black Mask where perhaps the time for street theater and symbolic action was over, and then all of a sudden you're no longer using art tactically, but you are being tactical almost in a direct militant sense, right? I mean, this is about engagement rather than symbolic action. You were engaging directly.
Right. We intended to move the struggle to another level. Like I coined the term affinity group, and we created affinity groups. And in that affinity group, there were 3 or 4 people that knew each other and trusted each other with their life. There were a lot of ex-special forces and veterans in our affinity groups. There were people that had weapon knowledge. And so we were moving the struggle to another level. Like we know the guerrilla theater worked for a while. It was important, but we felt that now we had to push it to the next. So there were sabotage, there were armed robberies. I mean, everything was escalating, and we felt that was the only way the government would then say, we better end the war in Vietnam because we're losing it with our own citizens.
You're losing the war in the streets of New York City,
Correct.
in the streets of Chicago.
And so we escalated to that point. That's when we and then they killed that policeman. It was moving to another level.
So I want to talk about that. When things begin to move to another level, obviously, that changes the whole dynamic for everyone involved. And, the people who participate in that escalation have to prepare themselves for another level of potential outcomes, whether it's the success of demonstrating to a government that, an illegal war, an unjust war is unsustainable abroad because it's going to come home in the streets. But it's also going to have personal repercussions in your life.
Yeah, and I mean, like the electric grid, like Pacific Gas and Electric on the West Coast was totally destroyed by affinity groups.
Who were doing sabotage, were doing direct action in that form.
And it was moving, that was moving throughout the country.
Yeah.
There were armed robberies.
Yeah.
I mean, everything had reached another level.
Yeah. And at a certain point, when the repercussions of that were really being felt far and wide, what happened? I mean, it seems to me that by 1970, 1971, 1972, Reagan happened.
The counter-revolution.
The counter-revolution happened.
And there was an assassination attempt on me, and I disappeared for 40 years. I lived in the wilderness on horseback for many of those years.
Donald, can I ask you?
Let me just finish. And I always felt when the young people started again, which is now, when they start again, I'm going back. I waited 40 years for them, for this next generation. And I was in Columbia the other day. I spoke to the students there. They invited me. And I talked with them about, it was the exact day that we took over Columbia, that I was at Columbia this time. 50 years later.
I've got a picture of Ben sitting on the quad at Columbia that I'll find on my laptop and share. But Donald, I also want to ask you about that moment. And I know that King Mob was involved in occupations in London at the LSE and also perhaps in Piccadilly. Where were the occupations that you participated in?
Those two events were very separate.
Yeah.
But in terms of the LSE went on for several weeks, and various occupations went on in that time. Everything in England wasn't about Vietnam. Everything in the States was about Vietnam for obvious reasons. Also in France, everybody was much more involved with Vietnam than the Brits, who managed to not pay too much. Of course, they were in Vietnam, but it wasn't the only issue that people were concerned with, in the way that the French also were very, very concerned with Vietnam, because of course it had been, a French colony before, and they had a war themselves before. So what made England a bit different was the occupations had to do with more local issues than just what was going on abroad and geopolitically. And the LSE occupation and occupation of student unions, yes, we went there just like Ben as, outside agitators. We were definitely outside agitators, and we advertised the fact. And we broke in with, we also had hammers and axes, and we broke down, doors and occupied the LSE, and we smashed everything we could find. And we went swimming in the pool inside, which we were not allowed to do. But it said on the evening paper that the Marxists were trying to run the occupation with the steering committee, But we were against the steering committee, and then the evening paper said famously, the Evening Standard said that the Marxists were keeping all the facilities like the cafeteria and the swimming pool closed, but the anarchists broke in and swam naked in the swimming pool, this is sort of just, it's joyful and fun and a lot of amusement. And, you know, in a way, of course the authorities were completely out of, in England they were completely beside themselves, but the people were having fun. I mean, in our part of the world, a lot of what we were doing was joyful, you know, ludic, as the situation, excuse me for mentioning the word, Set used to use that word, which wasn't an English word at the time, but it's become an English word now.
But there's an interesting, you know, I think what I'm just trying to get at is that there are similar things happening. They're happening in parallel, and in many ways they're happening in conversation with one another, but the stakes feel different in different places.
Very much so.
Therefore the tactics are different. And what I wanted to say, you know, Ben has mentioned about how after the assassination attempt, he went into the wilderness for 40 years. What happened, you know, with the King Mob moment? There was a certain point at which you left London.
Yes.
And you chose to put your energies elsewhere. But did you
I went into the wilderness, but in a different way.
You went into a different wilderness in Brooklyn.
I went on the beach in Puerto Rico.
The beach in Puerto Rico, okay. That must have been hard.
Well,
it was terrible.
I should have done that.
You could have, but you didn't. You did something more interesting. I know. I think it's important to realize that the way in which King Mob echoed Black Mask, which was a compliment to Black Mask and to Up Against the Wall Motherfucker, which was obviously the direct action successor organization, but it was totally a compliment to those people. And but we were also involved in local politics in Notting Hill Gate. We were also involved in student occupations, as we just said, and we had other kinds of activities in England which went on into 1968, even during the May events in France. I personally went over to France, but many people in England, we had on a smaller scale, of course. We were doing, you know, we had all kinds of direct action going on in the UK. Earlier on in '67 and '66, it was less so, because basically it was swinging London, and everything was about, the English brand of hippiedom, and also in terms of working class subculture, we had skinheads who couldn't decide if they were right wing or left wing, but they knew that they had to shave their hair, and they were all working class kids of a generation which was totally disillusioned and totally angry. And one portion of one element of of our group in a King Mob went to the East End of London and got involved in a completely different kinds of struggles, which basically was the beginning of squatting in London, which, as many people will know, squatting became a very big deal in the following years, in the 70s and so forth. So we were trying to organize the skinheads and join them up with the hippies. It was a little bit like trying to get...
And the greasers. I see hippies, greasers, and skinheads in that picture.
That's right. That's what it is. Yes, that's what it was all about. Aggro. We called ourselves aggro, but it was a subset. It was a subset of
and it was to get them to stop beating each other up so they could kick the ass of the cops and actually have a unified front against authority.
Right, and this had a theoretical justification. Our main theorist was Phil Cohen, and he and I worked a lot with him, and we were trying to figure out a way whereby an agent of rebellion could be developed, which went across class lines. Everybody knows that class lines in the UK are very, very hard to cross. It's quite different from here. It's even quite different to France in some ways. So that was part of our kind of project in the East End of London. In one of the issues of the King Mob Echo, you can read something called "Guerrilla Comes to the East End" or something like that. It's a page article which explains in rather I would say, sibylline tones, what exactly we were trying to do. But it really had nothing to do with the American influences, which were also very paramount for this group. But we also had a lot of other things going on, which had nothing to do with situationists and nothing to do with the American groups by whom we had been very, very seriously influenced. That's true, because Chris Gray went over to America, and especially Radcliffe had stayed a long time working with the Chicago Surrealists, who were affiliated with the remnants of the IWW. And that's a long story, and it's recounted very well in this book, I think, this book, which I recommend, recent book, 2020, Dreams of Anarchy and the Anarchy of Dreams, from Autonomedia. It's basically from the Chicago point of view, but it's a very big book, and it's very well researched, and I recommend it. I just wanted also to recommend this book, with some reservations, by Nadja Milner-Larsen, whose parents are in the front row tonight, and they should be very proud of her. She did a great job. She's not here. I think she lives out of town now. But anyway, it's a very useful book, tells the story of, I don't know how you feel about this book, Ben. I mean, one can find fault in here and there, but you helped Nadja a lot, weren't you? So,
I like the book.
So you
and
endorsed.
I like working with Nadja.
Yes. Which was the most important?
They were equal.
Oh no, nothing's equal.
But you know.
Anyhow, everybody can get this book. It's called Up Against the Real, and it's about Black Mask, and it's about Up Against the Wall Motherfuckers, and that's about what it's about. It's a pretty long book, and it's I think a thesis really, and it's very well, it's got a lot of apparatus, but it's very readable. And he tells the story better than we're telling it now. Let's put it that way.
But Arthur.
Yes.
I like to, could shift a slight bit.
Let's shift it.
Yeah. Because people don't realize, the history of it. Before Black Mask, the group of us that became Black Mask, we were all artists. And we got to a point when, because Vietnam had started and the civil rights struggle was heating up, we got to a point where we thought art was not enough to really change this system that we found ourselves occupied by, controlled by. So we decided that art needed to connect with politics and have both parallel. Not that one was more important, but they were both needed, art and politics. Then when Up Against the Wall had no involvement with the arts except our visual posters, and it became almost totally political and became an adjunct to the revolution, Up Against the Wall.
I mean, that's... Go ahead.
Then at some point, so we had art and politics joined. And then at some point, I realized, and some of us realized, that art and politics were not enough either together. There was another dimension. And, I know people don't feel comfortable with the word, but it's a more spiritual dimension. Not religion.
Right.
To me, religion was created to destroy spirituality. But the need to live as a free being, that is spiritual. And religion is the opposite. Spiritual frees people and religion enslaves them. So it's not, I'm not, but I felt then that those needed to be joined.
I would say that's probably the most important thing that I've learned through getting to know you is the subtlety of that distinction.
And the young people are on that page. They realize it. When I was at Columbia speaking with them about their occupation, I brought that up, and they loved it. They felt like they all realized that politics is not enough. Like they all saw the result of a political struggle. You end up with Lenin, then Stalin. The young people realize all that there's something wrong with just political thinking. It's a box. And why enter another box? We want to destroy the box.
This is what I think joins, Donald, your group, Ben, your circle, and also maybe the circle of Murray Bookchin, which is the non-hierarchical system of relationship, when you can destroy the kind of the poison inherent in these kind of like, I guess, masculine dominance hierarchies that are always latent in practically every, social organization. When you can root them out and say, that's poison, we're not going to participate in that.
And I think young people are ready for that.
I want to really open this up for conversation too, because we can sit here and talk and remember things, and I think we're getting a lot from Ben and Donald, but I really appreciate everyone who's taking the time to gather in this room, and we really are at a moment where we're not just talking about this as historical curiosity, we're living it, because we, I think, all realize that the conversations that are happening publicly through the mainstream media, things that you maybe thought were your friend, voices in the press and on the radio that seemed useful to you, you recognize flat out that they're lying to you, that they're smearing, distorting, and trying to create an ideologically driven picture that serves specific power interests. And we all know that, and we all feel that in very, very disturbing ways. And so it's sort of, how do we look at what was happening in 66, 67, 68 and learn from it, amplify beyond it? Ben is talking about, this non-hierarchical spiritual versus the formulations of religion, or we're talking about mutual aid, we're talking about, theater and protest versus direct action and escalation. So I just want to open this up, particularly to anyone in this room who might be participating right now in any of those theaters of operation here in New York City. So please, I'm going to actually just take this microphone and pass it out into the audience as well. So either that, or you can stand up yourself. If you don't want to use a microphone and you don't want to have power, you can speak with your own voice, but I also want to put this out there.
I was just going to pass around the mic so you didn't have to do it.
Nobody has any questions. Does anybody have any questions, or everybody feels like they've had all their questions answered? Alan Moore has a question.
Yeah, I got a question, and Arthur, please don't invite people to speak about their actions, because the NSA is listening to every fucking word. In any event, I just read the memoirs of Stuart Christie, who went down for the Angry Brigades. Right, exactly. Yeah. He went down in like 66, 67 in a very long, nasty trial with a bunch of other people for the Angry Brigades, which he describes as a leaderless, decentralized campaign of direct action, similar to what Ben was talking about was happening on the West Coast and around the country. And I wanted to know if you had relations okay, the statute of limitations, I don't know, but how you related to that campaign of distributed sabotage.
That's for me, right? Yeah. Well, I think I intimated that I left England in 1970 and came to the States. So I missed the story of the Angry Brigade. But it's a good question because a couple of people who were in the King mob ended up being members of the Angry Brigade, notably Chris Bott and a couple of others. And some of them spent a lot of time in jail. The police basically, even though they were guilty, it wasn't Stuart Christie, but another one of them said, I was guilty. It was actually Barker, right? John Barker, who was the leading Angry Brigade person. He said, I was guilty, but I was framed by the police anyway. Which is, what the police do. They frame you because they've got to get their conviction right? So, so all this was going on in the early 70s, as you know. And they never actually killed anybody. But they did, they did set up, they were guilty of exploding what were called bombs. They were pretty titchy little bombs, But they were bombs. I mean, they were explosives. And they did some damage. They attacked a minister's house. They had started by attacking, typically enough, because of the origins in, with the critique of consumerism, by attacking places that were associated with swinging London, places that were boutiques, and places like that place called Bieber was, I think, their first action. And they blew up the window and whatever and made a big mess on Kensington High Street, I think it is. That was when they started the Angry Brigade. That happened just as I was leaving. It was no connection. It was not connected with my leaving in any way, but it was just about the same time. So that dates it as early 1970, pretty much. And from then on, this whole saga went on. The trial was the longest trial in English history of anybody for things like this. And it went on for months and months. And of course, the police were totally disgusting. And the establishment was totally disgusting, and they made a whole big scene out of it. But it was real. They were for direct action, and they were mini bombers, and they were serious people. And some of them have survived. A couple died, have since died, especially a very, very nice woman called Mendelssohn. She's no longer with us. And other people, too, have no longer survived, but others have sort of, they have lived normal lives now. And John Barker still writes, still very political, and Stuart Christie, was actually a figure of great interest long before the Angry Brigade. Stuart Christie was a figure on the anarchist scene in London long before the Angry Brigade, long before King mob or anything else. He was a lifelong anarchist. It was in his blood.
But parallel to that, the affinity groups that were formed by Up Against the Wall were really quite active and really did a lot of damage and helped fulfill our dream that somehow the government would begin to realize that if they didn't end the war, they would lose their power, their control. Like the rebellion was just spreading rapidly. And
yes, that's quite true.
We were really successful with that effort.
It's quite true. And the media right now, they never mention the fact that the anti-war movement, including in its most radical forms, caused the end of the war eventually.
Yeah,
they never say that.
They won't admit
no,
it.
because
then
but they haven't
want you to do
they
it.
haven't forgotten it.
No.
They have muscle memory.
Right.
They remember.
And they
in
don't
Colombia, they're already talking as if people are taking over the university.
They don't want to mention it because they don't want you to repeat it.
Well, that's exactly right.
And it's being repeated right now. The universities are moving. I was so impressed with the young people that I met with and talked with in Colombia.
Do you have that picture, Arthur?
It's right there.
Oh.
It's your quote. One is 100 years in the history of revolutions. Donald forwarded me this picture of them the other day, and I thought that's perfect.
But that was Engels who said that.
It was Engels who said that, I know. But you forwarded me a picture of Ben with a quote of Engels.
Yes.
I like that. I like that. That's great.
And the subtitle should be Outside Agitator.
Outside agitator.
They're always using this terminology.
We have a couple more questions in the audience. Would you like to?
Maybe just speak to, I mean, in the fact that we're going up, I'm not going to seize power. In the fact that we're in a moment of just a revolutionary change, right? And that in itself then creates the counter-revolution to that. And I think like J.D. Vance, I think about skinheads, I think about working class culture, I think about the divide in the country. I'm thinking about what was that from your perspective, having lived through that, what would be the advice to like deal with the inevitable counter-revolution to the revolution, right? There's the pushback from the powers that be is inevitably.
How do we prepare ourselves for that?
Then or now?
Now.
Well, there's several mistakes that are being made. Number one, the idea that weapons should be banned is absurd. You ever heard of a revolutionary that wants to ban guns? In other words, you don't want to stop the spread of weapons. You want to stop the spread of weapons to people that use them in a really bad way, like psychopaths and people that are killing kids at schools. But
No, I mean,
we're gonna, people are gonna have to defend, if we build a parallel society, like right now there are a lot of communes or land, not really communes, but communities being formed all over the US. And they have networks between, they're gonna, at some point, they're gonna have to really defend themselves, because the right wing is better trained, militarized than the army.
So
and when they move against you, you're done, unless you build a defense. So that has to be done. So all these well-meaning liberals that want to ban guns, they're not helping anything.
this is again, a deep topic. I feel like we could dive into this, head first, and maybe we should. But when I think about groups where you see some preparation that maybe something has happened, that we can look at in recent history, I think of Rojava, and I think about bringing back the name of Murray Bookchin, whose ghost has very much been sitting at this table, I think, with these two friends of his. That in Rojava, the Kurds, who had read Bookchin and started thinking about non-hierarchical, democratic confederalism, they had mutual aid networks in place when society began to fall apart. And, they also weren't afraid probably of the business end of a Kalashnikov either. So they
weren't.
Yeah. And they're still not, so. But yeah, it's a time where, like, literally we have to start thinking about all these big questions that maybe some of us never ever wanted to think about in our lives. But, here we are.
Or some of us did think about.
Some of us have been thinking about them very much for many decades of our lives, but here we are all faced with them now. We have another question. Max Schumann?
I guess I'll just tag on to the last comment with another comment, is that the counter-revolution never stops. It's continuous, and that's because the global class war always has to be countered. And there's a total continuum between the Vietnam era that you guys were active in and what's going on in occupied Palestine and the genocide. And that it is an American war.
But I want to, maybe circle back to, what Ben and Donald, I think, were both talking about too. It's not just the need of revolutionary organizations to produce, direct action and kind of, fight in the struggle, but also to produce these places of community where something positive is happening, where there's carving out a space where you can create, whether it's something that provides room for non-hierarchical spirituality or provides room for joy or for even a sense of levity.
Room for life.
Room for life, right? So I want to just come back and maybe focus on that. When we're recognizing that there are struggles that are very real that involve, violence, naked violence and hidden violence, but that part of the struggle for liberation, and what I admire so much in the work that both of you have done for decades, is that kind of ability to push back far enough to create space where there's room for life. And and I guess if there's something that maybe we can kind of take away from this encounter here in this room, is that that's very much a part of what the effort is. What does it mean to struggle for liberation, which is to create room for life?
Can I address that a little? In a recent conversation I had with somebody, they pointed out that we were trying to bring this system to collapse. And they said, rightfully, you don't know how to grow food. You don't know how to hunt. You don't know how to make things. You don't know how to fix things, but you want the system to collapse. So what are you going to replace it with? So that's what we should be doing right now, is building a replacement. If you want the system to collapse, and so one element of one group of people is going to fight to force the system to collapse. But another group has to be building an alternative so that when it collapses, there's a way to live. If you need a supermarket to live, how can you make the effort to close the supermarket? So you have to find a way to replace it. And so throughout the country, I visit them. There are small communities and free society, groups that are building these alternatives. They have livestock. I advocate hunting. I'm not a vegetarian. So the people that are not vegetarian, they have to learn to hunt. But just think how important that is. When you learn to hunt, you're learning how to fulfill your basic need of life, but you're also learning about weaponry. So you're not being militarized, but yet you're becoming familiar with weaponry. So you're solving two problems at once. But we have to, help these groups that are building the alternative, so that when the system is finally brought down, there's something to replace it with. And that in turn helps bring it down. I mean, it seems really obvious to me. But maybe,
Donald, do you have thoughts about what happens when the system begins to wobble? And are you feeling that wobble? And what does it elicit?
Well, I do think that intentional communities are the only way forward. Because what is being prepared for us by the system is an unbelievable catastrophe. So yes, I completely agree with Ben, and I agree with him about hunting. I agree with everything he said. I mean, I don't do it myself. I just sit at home and type and look at my computer. But I'm getting on in years. I won't be here. I think the kids should learn everything they can about how to survive. You know, without all the accoutrements of a consumer
I hope
society.
to be here, and I'm older than you.
Well, you're older than me, but you're also wiser. So I figure that I'll get wiser as I catch up with you. Well, you live in hopes.
Hey, by the way, I got an email from a woman that was hired to go through Guy Debord after he left, go through his personal papers. So she emailed me. She said, in his personal papers is a manifesto by you. Here he was like always knocking me, but he had in his personal papers. And she said, can I publish it? Can I said, I don't have any copyright. It's whatever's out there is out there. Do what you want. So
I would say, apropos of that, I would recommend that perhaps in the wake of this conversation, I'd encourage people to actually read Black Mask and read King Mob Echo, because there's a lot of stuff in there which is not great, but there's stuff which is really great reading. And I really want to recommend it because it stands the test of time. And I think Black Mask in particular has some texts that are just really well worth taking a look at. People just tend to pick up these things and they like to have a copy and they think that's neat, etc., etc. It's 50 years old. They don't think it might be talking sense, but there is some sense in both those papers and others too, of course. I mean, but I just think it's worth making. If you acquire any of these things, read them. I mean, you can read the whole thing in a sort of not quite such a pleasant format. This has Black Mask and Up Against the Wall Motherfucker, everything pretty much. I think this is not very recent.
There's a new publication by Boo Hooray, which is almost the complete Black Mask, and I believe several of the other statements.
Boo Hooray has one.
And then there's also this Tom Vague publication on King Mob Echo, right?
This was, which we have ideological problems with. However, what does that matter in this world? King Mob Echo, English section of the Situation International. This one is an English publication, but I think there's an American one from AK, maybe? Similar? I'm not sure. No, AK distributed it. They didn't do that? They distributed it?
I think we're going to have to leave this room soon, anyway, and I need to get back over there.
There's a way to read it, the whole thing.
But I also want to invite everyone who's here.
We can occupy it.
We can occupy this room. We can stay all night. We can stay all night if we want to, and I'm up for it. I'm here for it. But I also wanted to say that if you do go back over to the other room, you can go to booth A9 and look at and read original 50-year-old copies of both of these journals because, because Donald has a tendency to keep things for posterity and to create archival sets of materials that we can look to as sites for the production of new knowledge. Part of Donald's, and Donald had a different tendency than Ben, because Ben, I think, burned everything and went to the wilderness, whereas Donald actually did a tremendous job of keeping these pieces of paper, even letters from Ben to the Situationists and the Situationists' response, etc. So that's where I encountered these two gentlemen in conversation with one another a couple of years ago. And so I thought it would be remarkable to rehearse those conversations on stage today, to unpack those conversations, to talk to them, and to revive some of these incredibly relevant, important conversations about resistance, rebellion, liberation, and creating space for life, resisting the machine that wants to replicate death in order to produce private wealth, in order to produce hierarchical power. And I hope we're all on the same page with that, and I hope in our own ways we're all going to be participating in that resistance. So thank you very much for coming and listening, and we'll see you all over in the hall. And if you're interested, Ben, as you know, Ben Morea is a visual artist, and we have some of his paintings that will be available here, and they'll also be available over in booth A9. If you're interested in Ben's work as a painter, as Ben said, the dialectic for him began with making art, and then art was not enough, but art is still a part of it, and his paintings are extraordinary. So please have a look at his paintings. Thank you again.
Right here.